Good evening. The June 18, 2018 meeting of the Arundel County Council is now in session. We ask you to stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Trumbauer has the invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let us bow our heads. Dear God, please bless this council and give us the wisdom and understanding and patience to make good decisions and do the best for our constituents. And please also watch over families, whether they are together or apart right now. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening once again. Madam Secretary, would you please read the ethics statement?
The Ethics Commission has asked that I advise you that under certain circumstances, members of the public may qualify as lobbyists when they testify before the County Council. If so, the law requires that certain information be filed with the Ethics Commission. The Chairman of the Ethics Commission has asked that those present review the Ethics Commission information in the foyer of these chambers. If there are any questions about lobbying requirements, speakers should contact the Ethics Commission in the Heritage Office Complex on Riva Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now invite members of the audience who signed up before the meeting to address the council briefly on any subject that's not included on the printed agenda, and remarks will be limited to 2 minutes. Madam Secretary, is there a sign-up sheet for?
We do not have anyone signed up.
We have no one signed up. If anybody would like to address the council at this time, please come forward. There are 6 seats up here, so anyone else who would like to come forward, please come forward now, and then we will hear you and close the public hearing. Ms. Johnson, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the County Council. We're going to try again to talk about the issues related to racism and this one specific individual named Judge Aaron, who was not a judge, he was a handyman, who was assaulted, abducted, maimed and mutilated, dumped for dead, but who managed to survive. And I want to say thank you publicly to the Anne Arundel County Public Library System. They're very accommodating. This book has one of the relatively long discussions of how horrible this case was. This is by Edward Harris, who was among other things, a pastor in Birmingham. But it's a civil rights memoir. We got as far as explaining that there actually was there were 4 trials, and the people who committed these awful acts were prosecuted, they were found guilty, and they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. But that when George Wallace became governor, he pardoned the 4 most defiant people, the people who felt there was nothing wrong in doing this. The 2 men who turned state's evidence because they didn't really want to participate in this, and they were horrified at what had been done, well, they got to serve their full terms. Their rights were not restored, but the people who were the dedicated Klansmen, in fact, had their voting rights and their rights to run for office restored. But here's a man who's been maimed and mutilated because of the assault, the castration, and he needed medical care. And so while the trials were going on, he got some medicine, he got some medical care. But as the time rolled on, he was left unable to work adequately and left in poverty.
Thank you very much. We'll now conclude the invitation to audience. Is there any item that any council member would like to place on the agenda? Mr. Smith?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So folks know that I've been working on bill. I'm going to introduce another bill, 6718. It's a lot merger bill that was affected. And when we get to that appropriate time for 2918, we've worked with the planning and zoning and Lori Rhodes from planning office as well. And I think there may be issues with us sort of changing 2918 holistically, because we made a lot of changes to it, and the staff does feel better that we submit a brand-new bill that has all of the language as an individual bill, and all the changes that the Planning and Office had made, the recommendations they had made. So we're not just basically changing the intent of the initial bill, and so this makes it clean across the board with this new bill that we're going to be submitting. We were going to amend 2918, so we would have been voting on it the second or the first meeting in July. With this bill being a clean version of all those amendments, we would see it at the second meeting of July and then vote on it and finalize it. So it only adds 2 weeks to that process. So when we get to 2918, don't be concerned if you hear us withdrawing it, because 6718 actually cleans up everything, and so it doesn't confuse us, the language, and us holistically changing 2918, which is what we've done. We've pretty much crossed out the entire bill, and so it's lost its purpose of that specific bill because it's changed. And so 6718 will allow us to do everything that we have worked to get to this point, so we can get this church back in the saddle, and they don't have any of these issues with their land merger process, and it just makes it much more cleaner. So introducing 6718 to finally get to conclusion.
Mr. Smith, now would be the appropriate time to state that you are withdrawing 29.
So I will withdraw 2918, as well as all the amendments.
And ask that 6718 be introduced.
And I am requesting that 6718 be submitted in its place.
Very well. Then Bill number 2918 is withdrawn. And Madam Secretary, would you please read the new Bill 6718?
Bill number 6718, an ordinance concerning zoning, residential districts, lot mergers, religious facilities.
Thank you. May I have a
And
motion that the
Mr. Chairman, I
Madam
believe we should
Secretary.
also be stating that the administration is withdrawing 52, has withdrawn 52.
The administration has withdrawn 52.
Correct.
18. Bill 5218 is withdrawn by the administration. Thank you. Mr. Smith, sure.
Just to make sure, and I saw Lori in the Office of Planning, so I saw head nods from everybody that they were in agreement. So I think the administration was on board with that as well, because we sent it to them earlier to comment on it. So just making sure that's clear.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Marzick, did you want to put that on the record?
It's fine.
That's,
Not necessary? All right, thank you. May I have a motion that the partial reading of any bill, resolution, and minutes constitutes a reading of the whole?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the minutes of June 4th, 5th, and 8th, 2018.
June 4th, 2018, the meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 7 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Smith, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. June 5, 2018, the meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Fink, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. June 8, 2018, the meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1:04 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Pruski, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 4th, 5th, and 8th, 2018?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes of June 4th, 5th, and 8th, 2018 stand approved as read. Madam Secretary, please read the titles of the bills to be introduced this evening.
Bill number 6518, an ordinance concerning licenses, swimming pools, personal and safety equipment. Bill number 6618, an ordinance concerning deferred retirement option programs, fire service retirement plan, police service retirement plan, detention officers, and deputy sheriff's retirement plan.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the titles of the resolutions to be introduced this evening.
Resolution number 1818, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to eliminate the 1,500-hour per year limit for contractual temporary employees.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
I have
Oh, excuse me.
quite a few more.
Please continue.
Resolution number 1918, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require the County Council to confirm by resolution the county executive's appointment of the county attorney. Resolution 2018, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require the County Council to confirm by resolution the county executive's appointment of chief of police. Resolution number 2118, resolution approving the declaration of certain improved county-owned property known as 100 Summit Avenue in Glen Burnie, Maryland as surplus property.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Are we finished with 2918, or do we do it now?
No, it's been withdrawn.
Okay. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 4918.
Bill Bill number 4918 is amended in an ordinance concerning licensing food service facilities, polystyrene food service products.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had quite an involved discussion about this at the last meeting, which I don't want to rehash. It also looks like we have a number of members of the public who've signed up. So I don't want to belabor the point. I do just want to make a couple of observations. The intent of this bill is really to take expanded polystyrene foam out of the waste stream for the food service industry. So we had a discussion at the last meeting that revolved around the recycling of this material. There was a lot of back and forth about that. But since that time, I've become aware of two things I wanted to share with the council. The first is the city of San Diego in California had set up a foam recycling program. And then just recently, they've made a, I think, decision to introduce a bill that would actually ban the material instead, because they found that the program is too costly and ineffective because food-contaminated food containers are still being sent to the landfill and not being recycled. Also, there was a fairly high-profile court case in New York City about whether they could ban polystyrene foam containers, and the court upheld that they could, and the court found that the foam could not be recycled in a manner that was environmentally effective and economically feasible, pursuant to the 2013 statute. So all that is to say, we had a lot of discussion on whether or not you could recycle this material and where you could take it to be recycled. And from what I understand, what the industry was proposing last meeting was that there is a drop-off location in Crofton that you could take your expanded polystyrene foam to. But I was shown pictures, and I received testimony from folks that said they've been to that facility and they don't take food containers. So I think even if you suspend disbelief and say, okay, well, maybe they do take food containers, what we're asking county residents to do, let's just take Mr. Grasso as an example. We're going to say Mr. Grasso is going to order his dozen chicken wings from takeout. He's going to eat them. Then we're asking him to go to his sink, rinse out the foam container so it's clean, drive it to Crofton, drop it off at the second story of a commercial facility, and then drive home. And I just don't think that's feasible, and I don't think it's viable. And I'm all for the administration put in budget funding to pursue a densifier. If they want to do that for packaging material, which is clean, and they want to devise some sort of central location and drop off and pick up, you know, I have nothing against that. I wish them well. But I hope that they will not expend that budget funding until they can demonstrate to the council and others that this recycling program is economically and environmentally viable, because from what I have learned, there's no market for this stuff. You can recycle it. You can probably recycle anything. But the question is there a market for it, and does it make sense? I think the key to this legislation is trying to get this material out of our waste stream so that it doesn't end up in our waterways. I think we'll hear some testimony about that later today. So I just urge my colleagues on the council, don't get too distracted down with this recycling argument. Recycling is good. I love recycling. But for this particular material, I want to get it out of the food waste stream. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Mr. Grasso?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of chime along with what Mr. Trumbauer was saying. You know, last week we heard the administration saying, I guess, roughly about 46% is being recycled. So you have to ask that question. If we were to get this in a recycling type deal, if 46% is our optimum we're going at, where's the other 54 going? Well, how much of that 54 actually will make it into the landfill? And what does it make it into the landfill winds up rolling right down the creek, Marley, and I watch it go zooming right on by. And then what happens is then you got to worry about the pieces and stuff that goes around. In Marley Creek, we have turtles that are this big. And they will think nothing of trying to snap that stuff out of the water. And then what happens to the turtles, the wildlife? So my issue is that it's great, but we live in an imperfect society, and we're counting on that these containers make their way actually to a recycling facility, and it won't. It's impossible for it to happen. So why would we continuously have something as hazardous as this is in our environment
And, that's pretty much where I stand on that issue. So I think what Mr. Trumbauer is pushing over here, and him and I have chimed on this many times over again, I don't care what party you're with, it's a bad idea to have this stuff in society. End of story, to save a couple pennies. And that's really what we've got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick from the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Greg Swain from the Office of Law, Chris Phipps from Department of Public Works. The administration continues to oppose this bill despite the amendments that were offered a couple weeks ago by the council. We're grateful for the council's support for our efforts to put a densifier in our budget, and we agree with you 100%, Mr. Trumbauer, that this will not move forward without a market for us to dispose of this product. That's why we have been working with Northeast Waste Disposal Authority to try to find some way to dispose of this in a way that benefits the county. But we do continue to oppose this bill. We talked through those reasons, and I won't belabor them as well from last time, that we didn't find a reason for the health or really to distinguish this as we've said in the past that all litter is bad litter, and this is a form of that litter. And in addition, we do believe that this is another tax that would be put on small businesses throughout the county who use this product. And we believe we need to stop nickel and diming these businesses in the county. And we would ask you to oppose this bill tonight.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Grasso.
Not to beat up on Mr. Marzick, but I remember back in the day when we had lead in gasoline, okay? And we got away from lead in gasoline, and we used to substitute for that. Supposedly lead was used as a scavenger and also to create the octane of the fuel. And people had a lot of problem with, let's take the lead out of this because this was going to jack the price up. But yet it was environmentally not good because, as most folks know, lead is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. You can't get rid of it. It's an element. And once it goes up, it comes somewhere in the ground. But we went through the same type of thing with lead gasoline, and look where we are today. We also went through the smoking thing. We're going to put bars out of business. Oh my God, they can't smoke, and the world's going to come to an end. But guess what? The bars are still in business, and the few that have to smoke outside. Now, I don't know how you feel about things, but I like going into a restaurant and not have to smell somebody's cigarette in my face, okay? Or maybe I want to go into a bar and have a pina colada, and this guy over here is not smoking a cigar down over here. But the world was going to come to an end. This is no different than that, and to say that it's any different than that is just downright ludicrous. In my personal belief, when we take cigarettes and you throw them down into the ground, you got the exact same thing. You turn around, you take a cigarette and a glass of water, and watch what it does to that water, yet people freely throw it down there. So like what Mr. Marzick said over here, littering is littering. But that doesn't mean that we keep kicking the can down the road. We got a problem. We know styrofoam's bad. We know flicking cigarettes down there are bad. We know that smoking in the public is bad. We knew all these things. And the question is, the leadership here is going to be determined by this vote, okay? Who is going to stop kicking the can down the road? That's the question you're going to see answered tonight. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Is there any further discussion? Any other questions for the administration? Thank you. Then we will now open the public hearing. Remarks being limited to 2 minutes. We have a sign-up sheet, and I'm going to call the first 6 names and ask those people to come down and take these seats. Nico Pape, Alex McCreary, Owen McCreary, Barrett Aiken, Griffin Aiken, Jennifer Aiken. Would you folks please come down and take these seats? Which one is Nico? Okay. For all of you, I'm going to ask you if you would please say your name when you begin, and please say your address when you begin, and then we'll give you 2 minutes, okay? And we'll go. Mr. Nico, you are up. Name and address.
My name is Nico Papa.
Take your time. Go ahead.
I live in Pasadena, Maryland, and I
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Fink.
Nico, how old are you?
10.
10. Do you support the styrofoam ban?
I support the styrofoam ban.
You support this bill? How come?
I support it because, well, would you like when you get takeout, the styrofoam, if you're at hot food, styrofoam, the chemicals go into your food, and then you get all these nasty chemicals in your food and you eat it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
not
just gross and disgusting.
Sure. So you came down here from Pasadena, and you're asking us to support this bill, right?
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Alex, which one is Alex?
Me. My name is Alex McCreary, and I'm from Pasadena, Maryland, and I support this bill because styrofoam, it doesn't compose. When our grandkids are alive, that a styrofoam tray that we use today, right now, will still be there when they're alive.
Okay, and so you're in favor of the bill?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down. Owen, who's Owen?
I'm Owen McCreary, and I live in Pasadena, Maryland. I support the styrofoam bill because once we use the styrofoam and we litter it, it floats into the ocean, and an animal might eat it and get sick.
All right, and that's what we want to avoid, right? Okay, Barrett.
I support this.
This is Barrett Aiken from Pasadena. Go ahead, sir.
I support this styrofoam bill because it is bad for the environment, and a styrofoam cup that is used today will still be here in 500 years. Also, it breaks down into small pieces and animals will eat it. The schools in the country use 6 million styrofoam trays a year, but the cost on the environment and my health is too high.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. You must be Griffin.
Say your name. Go ahead, say your name.
This is Griffin Aiken from Pasadena. Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead, buddy. Tell me, where did you find this? Can you tell them where we found this? When we walked in the building, where'd you find this? Come on, buddy. Tell them.
Mr. Fink has this question for you, sir.
Griffin, what's in your hand? What is that? Is that a plate?
What is that?
Griffin, is that a plate? Is that a cup?
It's a styrofoam cup.
It's a styrofoam cup. Are they good or are they bad?
Bad.
They're bad? You don't want to see these anymore in the county, do you?
No.
No? Are you in school?
Preschool.
I'm at preschool.
You're in preschool? What preschool you go to?
Magazine.
Magathy?
Cooperative.
Cooperative, yeah. I know where that is. And is Barrett your brother? Yeah? Thanks for coming down here, Griffin.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You must be Miss Jennifer Aiken.
I am, yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having us. We wanted to come to support this ban. There's no reason styrofoam should exist in this world at all. It is one of the most destructive items that exist on the planet. It's so harmful to animals, to our health. When burned, it releases dioxin, which is one of the most poisonous air pollutants. It ends up in our oceans. Most of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch has this in it. We actually, walking into your building tonight, picked this up right in front of the building. It was about to go into the storm drain. We came in right before it started raining. If we didn't pick this up, it would have ended up in the storm drain, right here, right in this area. And these are my little environmentalists. They pick up trash wherever we are. We pick up trash every day. We live on the bay. We scooped out a net full of trash yesterday, and most of it is styrofoam, single-use plastics. And so we fully support this ban. I want them to have a healthy world when they're adults, when they have children and grandchildren. And it's really disturbing that this is a product that's still being used. So we'd like to see it go away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nico, Alex, Owen, Barrett, Griffin, and Mom. Thanks a lot for coming down. We appreciate it. You are dismissed. Thank you. I'm going to call the next 6 names, please. Kristen McCreary, Kenneth Papa, Rick Kissel, Jesse Ilp, I think. Ilip, excuse me. Elaine Lutz and Juliet Page, if you'll please come down and take these seats. Thank you. Kristen McCreary?
Hi, I'm Kristen McCreary. I'm from Pasadena, Maryland, and I support this bill to ban styrofoam because of all the things that our kids just said, and because it is horrible for the environment. And just to save some money, we don't need to have this product in our lives.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kenneth Papa?
I'm Kenneth Papa. I'm from Pasadena, Maryland.
So just wait 1 second for us, sir, and we'll get your mic on, okay? Sorry about that.
I'm Kenneth Papa. I'm from Pasadena, Maryland, and I am for the ban on polystyrene. I believe that it's because of greed that things like this exist in our environment. Just like Councilman Grasso was saying earlier, we knew cigarettes are bad. We know that lead is bad, yet it continues to be in our society because people profit off of it. There's no reason for polystyrene to be used when there's alternatives that are completely viable. And our children shouldn't have to go to school and have no other choice but to be served on a polystyrene tray. That's a bad message to send to them. It makes them feel as if that there is no other alternative because they don't see it. We are the example for our kids. They want to be good stewards of our environment. My son, Nico, came home one day and he said, "Dad, I thought of a project." He invented a machine to clean up microplastics in the ocean. I said, "Why?" To me, I said, "That's great." But at the same time, I think my son's thinking about cleaning up our problems, the issues we created for the world. He's trying to solve it. Why do we continue to make it worse? It needs to stop. People need to stop being greedy. We need to do what's right. We know what's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papa. Rick Kissel?
My name is Rick Kessel. I live in 717 Warren Drive in Annapolis. I'm speaking on behalf of the Executive Committee of the Anne Arundel County Sierra Club Group. The object of the ban on foam food containers is to prevent harmful marine pollution caused by foam litter. Everything else is a distraction from taking action on what is shaping up to be the most serious threat yet to the environment. The inconvenient truth is that once in the public domain, it is impossible to keep a significant percentage of EPS out of our water, since it virtually never decomposes. The concentration of EPS in our water will increase until such time as so much damage to our water and marine life has occurred that a ban will eventually be legislated. I urge you to be on the right side of history. Vote for the ban now. It is the right thing to do. I consider this to be a defining piece of legislation, either showing concern or indifference to protection of clean water and a healthy maritime environment. The week after previously giving testimony to the council on this subject, I attended a kickoff of the second annual Green Give, a 24-hour fundraiser for local environmental organizations, all of which operate in Arundel County. I spoke with several other representatives concerning the EPS ban. All were in favor, and all were very interested in which council members seemed to support the ban and who seemed opposed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kissel. Appreciate it very much. Jesse, is it Iliff? Iliff, excuse me. Good evening, sir.
Evening. I have a few handouts that I brought.
Would you go ahead and say your name and address, please, for us?
Sure. My name's Jesse Iliff. I work at 2822 Solomon's Island Road in Edgewater. I live at 104A Mead Drive in Annapolis.
Thank you.
So I'm here in favor of Ordinance 4918. I have prepared testimony that was delivered at your last hearing. I share the sentiments about marine pollution. I built a trash trap in a stream on Crab Creek on the South River. Every time it rains more than a ½ inch, it collects 2 to 5 pounds of polystyrene foam, which otherwise would have made it into the river. Now, it's got 1-inch netting, so a lot of those little pieces get through anyhow, and I'm sure they're being scooped up by turtles and fish and all the other marine animals. And it's clear, I don't think anybody really objects or disagrees with the idea that this is a pollution that we need to get a handle on. But you guys have multiple sorts of considerations to weigh, and I understand that there are people from the business community here that are saying this is going to cut into their bottom line, and that may be true, but we're at the end of a few centuries of business interests externalizing their costs onto the common good and onto the environment and everybody else that's not involved in their industry. And I hope that we're coming to the end of that period starting tonight. I wonder whether any of the folks from the restaurant, trade group that's here today would be willing to have their members come up and say that they are proudly part of the dwindling population of businesses that are willing to trash the environment to save their customers a few extra cents on their takeout. I suspect nobody would take that public stance because when you put it in black and white like it is, it seems pretty bad. But that is really the crux of the issue. Are they going to pass those costs on to their consumers? Maybe. Probably not. Most of the time, or if they do eat that cost, then good for them. But probably they'll pass it on to their consumers. And I, for one, am willing to pay 9 cents extra for a tray of takeout.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iliff. Appreciate it. Elaine Lutz.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Elaine Lutz here representing Chesapeake Bay Foundation in support of the styrofoam ban. As we all know, styrofoam is a ubiquitous and unsightly form of trash. And yes, it's caused by people purposely littering, but it's so easy to litter when it's a single use, one time, usually traveling from place to place. That's why you're taking takeout. So styrofoam tends to be littered a little bit more. And what's the bigger problem with styrofoam is that it breaks down into microplastics. Microplastics are persistent, it's impractical to clean up once it enters the waste stream, and has negative impacts to organisms. Microplastics are being a bigger topic all the time. We're seeing them, we're discovering them more and more in our open waters in the Chesapeake Bay and the tributaries. This is why we started looking at source reduction and banning products that contain and easily create microplastics like microbeads. The federal government and the state of Maryland enacted a ban on microbeads because it created that same sort of microplastics pollution that broken down styrofoam creates. Microplastics leach their own chemical contaminants into the environment and accumulate other chemical contaminants. The experimental evidence has demonstrated that microplastics can be toxic to aquatic animals at the embryonic stage, affecting development. In mussels and other bivalves, smaller microplastics have been shown to cross cell membranes and cause inflammation. And in fish, the ingestion of microplastics have been shown to alter behavior, cause liver toxicity, and changes in gene expression. I don't need to tell you how important and valuable our fisheries are in Maryland and Anne Arundel County, and they continue to be threatened by this pollution. I participated with Trash Free Maryland in some trash trawls. They might have already talked about that or talk about that later tonight. And we're seeing these microplastics and small pieces of styrofoam collecting in many bay tributaries and habitats. So
thank you.
We urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Juliet Page. Good evening.
Yes, I have a handout as well here. Thank you.
Oh, I have written comments to give.
Hello, my name is Juliet Page. I live on Mill Creek on the Magathie River in Arnold. I've been there for the last 20 years. I'm a master watershed steward for 10 years, and for the past 32 years, I've earned my living as an engineer working in the environmental and scientific research related to compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. In the transportation sector. I'm testifying as a private citizen and a resident of Anne Arundel County about the impact styrofoam has on our waterways and to urge you to pass the ban on styrofoam. According to the county's Litter and Floatables Comprehensive Plan, developed by Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, as part of their MPDES MS4 permit, I quote, Anne Arundel County has a total of 379,353 acres, of which approximately 30% of the total area of the county is water. So a significant portion of our county is water. It's subdivided into 12 primary watersheds, which are further divided into numerous smaller subwatersheds. Portions of the Patapsco tidal watershed are listed by the Maryland Department of Environment as impaired for trash, which means that they're unhealthy, and the biggest cause of that is the trash. The plan also states, this is the Anne Arundel County plan, that prevention and removal of litter and floatables in the county's waterways will have a significant positive effect on water quality and aquatic life and habitat. Eliminating litter and floatables from our waterways will make recreational activities more enjoyable and make our rivers and streams even more aesthetically pleasing, leading to an increased public interest in our waterway. I'm quoting that from Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works report as part of their NPDES MS4 permit requirements. Before my daughter graduated high school and college, she's now an environmental scientist, I organized and participated in many creek and stream cleanups with the Girl Scouts and through local schools. I still participate in watershed cleanups with the Magathie River Association and Project Clean Stream. One of the big problems is the polystyrene foam, also known as styrofoam. It's that it never biodegrades. It does break down into increasingly smaller pieces. Thank you. With the recent good news about the health of the bay improving, we really need to continue the momentum and remove all of the sources of pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate it. With that, I'm going to dismiss this panel, please, and call down the next 6 people. Thank you very much for coming down. Kate Bohannon, Bob Gallagher, Devin Glockham, Pam Luby, Julie Shea, and Claire Jordan. Good evening, folks. Kate Bohannon?
Is it on?
It is now.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Kate Bohannon. I'm a resident of Annapolis, and I'm here to represent the Annapolis Environmental Commission. We are an advisory body that advises Mayor Buckley on environmental issues such as this one. While we know that there's no such thing as a perfect single-use disposable container, we're certainly opposed to to expanded polystyrene foam, which is, we argue, one of the most imperfect. We could talk more about the environmental issues. We've already submitted a written testimony to the council to that effect. But I wanted to talk this evening specifically about city and county cooperation. As you probably know, the city has introduced similar legislation that will pass hopefully later this week. They have a supermajority, 6 out of 9 council members currently in support of a EPS ban at the city level. There's been a lot of discussion about making things harder on businesses, and I would argue that having different standards at the city and county levels would impose a hardship on businesses that have locations in both jurisdictions. These are businesses like Naval Bagels, Vita Taco, and others. We believe that one standard across jurisdictions would be most beneficial. Finally, I would mention that our commission took a tour of the Spa Creek headwaters not far from here about a year ago, and we did observe much of this material in our local creek. And so we urge you to support this bill and ban EPS foam.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bob Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Bob Gallagher. I live in Annapolis. I'm co-chair of the Arundel Chapter of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and we support this bill. I think we've advised you all of that previously. Particularly thank the sponsors of the bill, Councilman Trumbauer, Grasso, and Pruski, and special thanks to Mr. Smith for his constructive amendments to keep this bill moving. It would be a real credit to the council if we could pass this bill unanimously. I won't take up your time talking about the horrible effects of the bill on the environment and wildlife and the availability of reasonable alternatives. There are lots of people with more expertise you've already heard from, and we'll hear from them. Probably none of them are as eloquent as the young people on the first panel. But I just would like to make one point. Passing this bill won't make us pioneers. This has been done in lots of other places. Our closest county neighbors in Prince George's County have had a bill like this in effect for almost 2 years. And I had the good fortune just a few weeks ago to be able to chat with the county executive over there, Rusher and Baker, about it. And he reported that the bill has worked exactly as intended. It's dramatically reduced the flow of the stuff into the waste stream, and that virtually none of the parade of horribles predicted by the opposition has been seen in Prince George's County. So please do the right thing and pass this bill unanimously would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher. Devin Glockham.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Devin Glockham. I'm the general manager of Vita Taco Bar in Severna Park. As a business that is consistently focused on local and sustainable sources and responsible sources as well, we all agree on how bad the EPS is on the environment. I don't need to go into that any further. I'm a numbers guy, and for those who think the viability of a business is based on a couple of cents, I'm here to tell you a little bit different. I've analyzed our takeout costs of takeout containers, and the bottom line is it costs us 2 cents less, or 2 cents more to provide a plant-based fiber, completely compostable container versus an EPS alternative. We do about 9,300 units per year, $187. To the owners of the business, I can speak for them and tell you that that is not a number that they consider even a blip on their radar. Being focused on local and sustainable sources, they feel that it's not even a conversation that needs to be had. There are alternatives, and our guests that come into our building expect us to be responsible and environmentally conscious, which is like what we like to be. Just leaving you with this. Going into the business, I analyze costs because I'm an analytical person, and even if this cost us, 10% more per year, which it doesn't, we would go ahead and use the alternatives because the public, deserves better. Our children deserve better. Our grandchildren deserve better. Our environment deserves better. So I just thank you for your time tonight.
I thank you, Mr. Glockham. Thank you very much. Pam Luby.
Hi, my name is Pam Luby.
I'm from Annapolis, Maryland. I'm wearing two hats today as I testify, first as a candidate for District 33 delegate and second as a former restaurant owner. District 33 is the largest district with about 100,000 voters. I've had the opportunity to talk with hundreds of them through canvassing and attending events. Protecting our environment always lands as one of the top 3 priority issues, no matter who I'm talking to or what their party affiliation is. I've been campaigning for over a year, and I've never met an individual who is against the ban. In fact, they are surprised Maryland, a state which considers itself an environmental leader, is dragging its feet on this issue. They want to know where their elected officials stand on this issue and want a commitment from me to pursue this legislation if elected. Like the ban on fracking, this issue can sway voters. I can also talk about this as a former restaurant owner. I ran a cafe and catering company out of a marina in Annapolis. 90% of my business was takeout. The argument that this bill would cause financial hardship or undue burden on small business is a complete falsehood. In my restaurant, paper products were used to wrap sandwiches and paper bags were used for carryout. Not only was this environmentally friendly, but it cost less than using polystyrene products. Certain items do require a hinge container, and there are plenty of eco-friendly options for restaurateurs. The cost, like he said, is, I calculated, at most 5 cents per container. That cost, like the cost of a tomato on a sandwich, is incorporated into the cost of the meal. It's not taking away any profits from a restaurant. Furthermore, restaurant owners like me have found that customers appreciate patronizing environmentally responsible businesses, and it actually increases return customers. Polystyrene bans are sweeping the nation and are already in place in certain counties and cities in Maryland. It's just a matter of time before this legislation passes. So I'm asking, what are you waiting for? It is indisputable. Can I finish?
Summarize, please.
This is not government overreach. It's the right thing to do, and it needs to be done now. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Julie Shea.
Hello, my name's Julie Shea. I live in Severna Park, Maryland. I do have this one pie chart to share. I testified on the 4th that I had surveyed restaurants throughout Anne Arundel County, a sampling of 63 different restaurants, to just survey where things are currently for eateries in the county. So we surveyed 100% of restaurants in 13 different shopping centers. 58% of those, which is the green section right here, 58% already use no foam. In the red section, 40% are using some other type of container. As an example, in Severna Park, when I go to my favorite Thai restaurant for takeout, the only foam that they use is for rice. Everything else is an alternative product, which shows that she even prefers paper boxes, but sometimes Restaurant Depot is out of those. So in other words, restaurants are already using alternatives and they're surviving very well. I'm glad that Vita Taco is represented because I'm not in the food industry, and I know it doesn't sound good for me to say that I find it affordable, but restaurants do say that they find it affordable. Compliance is over 90% in Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Prince George's County with their ban. And I did a quick survey of some folks who own restaurants in my area. Park Deli, which does a lot of takeout and catering, said that it's hard to calculate how little the foam containers would, or any takeout containers are represented in their operating costs because it's less than 0.5%. That's how little it's a negligible amount for them. Vita Taco did already testify. Cafe Mezzanotte says that it's less than 1% the cost of total goods.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. Please
finally, just one more thing. Boatyard Bar and Grill also said that it's infinitesimal and the financial impact is immaterial.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Jordan, Claire Jordan.
Good evening. My name is Claire Jordan, and I am the Advocacy and Outreach Manager for Trash Free Maryland. I'm here today to address the specific claims that an EPS foam recycling program is a feasible option for the county rather than an outright ban. Anne Arundel County isn't the first place in the country to consider an EPS foam recycling program. As Councilman Trumbauer shared briefly in his remarks, the City of San Diego passed a bill to allocate $90,000 a year towards recycling of EPS foam food service containers last year. Despite initially supporting an EPS foam recycling program, Councilman Ward from the City of San Diego's City Council and the full City Council are now considering scrapping that program and implementing a ban instead. According to recent news articles, the reason for canceling the EPS foam recycling program is because it is too costly and not effective at mitigating EPS foam litter. Additionally, the City of New York lifted their foam ban in 2015, instituted a curbside foam recycling program, then abandoned it in 2017, putting the foam ban back in place after the New York City Department of Sanitation conducted a study concluding recycling was a waste of taxpayer money. Last week, a New York State court ruled that the Department of Sanitation's report was correct in determining that banning this materials was the most cost-effective option. If that isn't enough, Anne Arundel County already has an EPS foam drop-off center operated by DART located in Crofton, as Councilman Trumbauer stated. According to signs posted, the drop-off center does not accept EPS foam food service container and only accepts block foam, which this bill does not ban. If the manufacturer of this product and two major U.S. cities do not see the benefits of recycling EPS foam food service containers, how can Anne Arundel County be expected to do so? Please vote yes on Bill number 49-18. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. We'll dismiss this panel, and I'm going to call 6 more names, please. Brian Bogardi, Miss Drury, Maeve Drury, Olivia Fay, Walter Reefer, Mike Martinez, and Mike Levy. And I'm sure I messed those up. I apologize. Please straighten me out when you get here.
I'm not Mr. Reefer.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry.
That's all right. My apologies. Bryn, and the first name was Bryn, not Brian, wasn't it? Yes. Sorry about that.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Bryn Bogard. I'm a junior at Broadneck High School in Annapolis, and I'm the president of our Eco Action Team. The signature program at my school is environmental literacy, and because of this, our extremely close proximity to the Bay and the incredible science courses offered to our students, the students at my school, like those in many other schools in Annapolis, are extremely environmentally aware and knowledgeable. All of the science courses offered at Broadneck at least touch on the environmental impact that our actions have, not only on the surrounding environment and animals, but on future generations. Every day I go to school and I take these classes and I learn the detrimental effects of substances like expanded polystyrene foam. Then I go to lunch and see hundreds of students using white foam lunch trays, then effortlessly dumping them into trash cans once they're done, because they have no other option. To me, this seems sort of contradictory, teaching us the negative effects of these substances, but then giving us no other choice but to use them every single day. And we get it. Everything comes down to the money in the end. If cardboard lunch trays and to-go containers cost the same as styrofoam, we wouldn't be having this hearing. We would have made the switch years ago, but it's not. And we're at the point where we have to ask ourselves, would you rather pay an extra 5 cents for your meal and help the planet, or would you rather save a dime and destroy the Bay? Whatever decision you make now, just remember in the end, it's not going to be leadership from Anne Arundel County schools or executives from DART who testified at the last hearing fixing the styrofoam waste problem in 20 years. It's going to be in my generation. It's going to be the students sitting behind me and the kids who testified like in the beginning. We're going to be the ones who have to find a solution to all of the styrofoam in our Chesapeake Bay if you don't. So you may want to consider our opinions too in making a decision on the topic.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Is it Maeve Drury?
Maeve, yes,
Maeve.
correct.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Maeve Drury. I live in Severna Park, Maryland, and I attend Indian Creek Upper School in Crownsville, and I'd like to tell you about how styrofoam affects my daily experience. At school, we do not allow styrofoam. All of our dishes and cutlery is all metal or reusable, it's washable
Plastic?
Sure. And we also institute a composting program, as well as an environmental science course is obligated for all students, so we may understand the effect that we have on not only the Chesapeake Bay, but the world. While at school, I don't interact with styrofoam. When I leave school to go to sailing practice, it's all too often I see it in the bay. I find sailing to be a really relaxing experience, but what I don't find relaxing is when I go down to the dock and I see dead fish, dead crustaceans, and dead birds lying beside styrofoam cups as well as plastic bags. Oftentimes, my team and I won't even want to enter the water, which is a natural part of sailing, because when we come out, we're covered in a layer of sediment caused by debris and pollution. Imagine how such an experience that we love so much could be affected by something as simple as styrofoam. So if not for the environment, if not for the wildlife, please support this bill for the children, for the peers, and for everyone who enjoys the Chesapeake Bay and wishes to continue to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Drury. Thanks for your testimony. Olivia Fay?
Hi, my name's Olivia. Hi, my name is Olivia Fay. I live in Severna Park, Maryland. Currently, my school, Severna Park High School, is certified as a green school and is part of the Maryland Green Schools Award Program. I'm, of course, honored that my school is a part of this and that it recognizes schools for being environmentally active and encouraging environmental sustainability. However, contrastingly, my school continues to implement polystyrene, especially for our lunch trays. To me, the inclusion of something in our schools that contributes to the pollution of our local bay and harms our local ecosystem is not something a school should be rewarded for. We are certified as a green school and therefore an environmentally conscious one, yet we continue to use polystyrene materials as it is what is available to us. In my mind, having a school that is certified as a green school that simultaneously implements material that is poison to our school is extremely hypocritical. In my mind, I don't feel we can technically be a green school unless we act in a way that does not ultimately negatively impact the environment. Such an action would be banning polystyrene. I do not intend to criticize the Green School program whatsoever because it's an amazing program. However, part of being a green school is teaching environmental literacy. We're taught the negative impacts of such materials and then almost unwillingly overwrite this by being forced to use polystyrene trays in our lunchroom. Having the option of implementing polystyrene in our county contradicts the teachings of these classes and contradicts our own certification as a green school. A ban of polystyrene ensures that our schools are, in fact, environmentally friendly and that we are not contradicting the teachings in our schools with environmentally damaging actions and materials such as polystyrene. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so it's not reefer.
That was another bill. It's Walter Ryder, Rock Ridge Road, Millersville, 21108. I work for the EPS Industry Alliance, which is a North American trade association representing the manufacturers of the insulation and the protective packaging, and we operate the drop-off that's been referenced a couple of times. And the testimony that does indicate that there is signage there that says no food service, that is true, but we take food service. And the reason that that's on a bin that we put out there for the convenience of the people dropping off, and that bin was donated to us by one of the resin suppliers, and at their location where they make the bins, they do have that limitation. This year, our volume is up 44%. And the food service that comes in, it's not the single package of a dozen chicken wings. It's usually folks that take the time to rinse them out, put them in a bag, and bring them. Our volume is up a massive amount. It does require a little bit of effort. We do work with the city of Bowie. They provide a drop-off location for their people, and they, every now and then, will bring a truck up. And we also work with the city of Greenbelt, and we're open to work with other locations to bring their material up to our place. And from there, it is taken by dark container to Leola, Pennsylvania, where it's made into new plastic. Now, I'm sure if the MRF people have been here, they've told you the struggles that they have with the mixed bundles and the mixed plastic and the issues with the recycling markets overseas. Well, this is happening right here in the States. and it's being recycled, and it is working. It does require a little bit of effort, but the citizens who bring it in are very excited, very happy to have it, and because of that, we have a very high quality, and everything's getting recycled. Like Sussex County, New Jersey, where it's the most valuable commodity they sell. They get $400 a ton for it, and I saw the check being written. So in addition to saving the volume in their landfill, they're also selling it. Where it's remanufactured.
Thank you. I have to
Mr. Chair.
interrupt.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
I did have one
Mr.
question
Smith.
for Mr. Wright. You said it went up 40%. What was the volume you were taking in? And then what is the new volume that you're taking in? Just
Okay,
curious.
last year, we took in...
At that one location?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a location, we're behind the Dunkin' Donuts on Route 3, Cronson Boulevard, up above the CQ. We have bags outside where if we're not open, we come down and help people bring it up. We also have the bin that's next to the dumpster. And that bin, we try very hard to keep it empty. It does fill up. And last year, we did 3,500 pounds, which 1,100 very large bags, not like industrial sized bags, because the stuff is so light that a ton and a half is a huge number. And so far this year, we're up 44%. So we're going to be, we may be double, because the summer's our busy season as people clean things out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Mike Martinez. I work with Dart Container Corporation. I live near Atlanta, Georgia, but we have a manufacturing facility in Fredericksburg. One of the things I find, I've been doing this now about 25 years, and I come to hearings like this, and I often hear a false dichotomy. What I hear is people say, you're either for the environment and therefore you want to get rid of foam, or you're against the environment. And I think that's a false dichotomy, because often what happens is we look at these issues and we don't put them in context. Let me give you an example. We'll often hear people say polystyrene foam doesn't biodegrade. Well, that may be the case. I once went to our engineers and I said, if I take a foam cup, a plastic cup, a paper cup lined with plastic, and a compostable paper cup, and I throw them on a beach, how soon before they disappear? And they said that's a nonsensical way to put it. It's all going to be there for the foreseeable future. So to our engineers, biodegradation is not the answer. It's not even the right question. We often hear people talk about litter. Yes, litter is a problem. No one wants to see litter on the beach or in the water. But if you ban every foam cup, you're still going to have marine litter. You're still going to have this problem. Some of it might not be as visible because the alternative products sink to the bottom, but you still have an issue with litter. Some people have alluded to health issues. And often what they're talking about is a chemical called styrene. And I'll hear people say, don't use foam because it has this chemical in it, and this chemical can be bad for you. And then I say to them, well, there's more of this chemical in a can of beer, or in a cinnamon roll, or in 6 ounces of a steak. Are you going to ban that too? And they say, don't be ridiculous. So if you were really concerned about the chemical, why is it you're focusing on only a foam product and not on the other products that have these chemicals?
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Appreciate that. Mr. Mike Levy.
Is this on? Yes. Hi, I'm Mike Levy with the Plastics Food Service Packaging Group. We represent companies that make plastics food service. And I want to touch on a few misconceptions, but more importantly, also put out the fact that there are good solutions for using foam, and you heard some of them tonight. I've been a science fair judge for 25 years, and I really encourage the kids to do the research. But one of the things that I do also encourage is that when you do the research, you really have to look at all of the available information out there. You just heard a little bit about the issue of health and safety. What you didn't hear are what the expert agencies say about polystyrene foam, styrofoam. For 50 years, FDA has regulated and found polystyrene foam to be safe for consumers. You already heard about some of the exposure levels, but what you haven't heard is agencies like the U.S. Toxicology Program, the National Institute of Health, American Cancer Society, saying that when it comes to polystyrene and styrene, there's absolutely no risk to consumers. So again, I think it's important to get that point across. The other thing is, on the whole issue of marine debris, Marine debris is an issue. It's certainly one that no one wants to see anything in there. But our industry is doing quite a bit. We have a global commitment and 355 projects from Asia to the U.S. to get at the root causes of how marine debris gets into the environment. And it's all about not having an adequate waste management system in some of the places, and it's also the same thing about litter. Polystyrene foam represents a small part of the litter, but we're part of that. So again, I encourage you to look at some of the solutions ranging from recycling education that are really going to hopefully make a difference. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars working with the Ocean Conservancy. And then finally, on the issue of recycling, I do encourage the program here to use the grant program for really drop-off. You can get a densifier too, but there's opportunities to do that. And then finally, I'll make a note that San Diego is recycling polystyrene foam, and while they're looking at a proposed ban, the issue there was it was $300,000. Now it's $90,000. But in addition to wanting to ban it, they're also currently recycling foam.
I have to ask you to stop. Thank you very much. I want to dismiss this panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it. Melvin Thompson. Cody Locklar. Tail? Kaylee, I'm sorry. Kaylee. Romano and Erica Jacobson. All of that's not my reading. Some of it is their writing. Your writing. Melvin Thompson. Mr. Thompson, good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, I'm Melvin Thompson. I represent the Restaurant Association of Maryland, and we are based in Columbia, Maryland. And let me start by saying that it is neither fair nor rational to burden Anne Arundel County businesses with a ban that forces them to pay 2 to 3 times more for their takeout containers when this council does not know the scope of local food service foam litter that this legislation purports to address. We've heard that there are a lot of restaurants that are voluntarily switching to alternatives as they can afford to do so. That means that a ban is unnecessary. And it also means that the restaurants who have not switched to alternatives aren't doing so because they can't afford it. We've heard a lot about litter, and we've shared with you previously studies from 2012 surveys of litter that showed that polystyrene foam food service litter composed only about 1.5% of all litter. You've also probably seen a 2015 Anacostia watershed litter survey study in areas of DC, Prince George's, and Montgomery that shows that PS foam food service litter on roadways was about 2.5% of large litter, about 4.8% of non-roadway litter. That's in areas in and around water. That means that over 95% of polystyrene food service foam is generally disposed of properly. But we haven't seen a study of a survey of Anne Arundel County litter. We don't know if the littering habits of Anne Arundel County residents are the same as those in DC, Prince George's, and Montgomery. We don't know how much of Anne Arundel County's litter is food service foam, yet this council is being asked to ban it. Again, it's neither fair nor rational to burden Anne Arundel County businesses in this manner when this council does not know the scope of local food service foam litter that this legislation tries to address.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Appreciate your comments. Kaylee Locklar.
Toll.
Toll.
Good evening, honorable members of the council. Kaylee Locklear Toll here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. Our office is on Conduit Street. I live in West Annapolis, for the record. To begin, you have our written testimony from the last hearing, and I want to be sure to reiterate that retailers firmly support protecting Marylanders from potentially harmful products and protecting our environment. However, and it is something that I point out in every hearing, but there is not one one piece of academically vetted research that supports the claims that the proponents have presented before you today. And it's also important to point out that because many of the alternatives are not biodegradable or recyclable, they will go to landfill or incinerators. This means it increases costs for taxpayers, counties, and our state. We also respectfully ask the council to think about the impact on brick and mortar stores. The bill before you says nothing about online sales, and for consumers that still want to purchase it, they merely have to go online to buy it, further driving business away from our members. And although the bill exempts meat and seafood products, it is important to point out that vegetables such as mushrooms or mixed meat and seafood products prepared in the stores in this county are not explicitly exempt from the legislation. Finally, our coalition urges the council to work with us to create expanded polystyrene recycling in the county. Banning products does not address the underlying issue that all of us care about, which is littering. And by acquiring a densifier, we eliminate waste with a recycling program in addition to a new potential revenue stream. And if I may follow up to what Mr. Martinez had pointed out earlier, the reason that there is trash in the waterways is an education issue. People do not care what it is that they throw on the ground, and that's where we need to focus our efforts.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Liv Romano.
Hello, my name is Liv Romano from Severna Park, and I'm representing on behalf of the 900 registered Green Party members who reside in Anne Arundel County. We support the amended form of Bill 4918, prohibiting the use and sale of polystyrene, also known as styrofoam products, in our county. Our position is firmly rooted in the values of the Green Party, which not only calls for environmental stewardship and personal responsibility, but also calls on us to live in a sustainable manner for the benefit of future generations, as myself and as these young children you've seen here today testifying against the bill. While recycling in the county has increased over the years, we now are faced with dealing with a material, styrofoam, which can no longer be accepted. We would like to acknowledge the claim by the Restaurant Owner Association that in order to accommodate a switch in alternative containers, the ban could possibly result in an increased cost for restaurant customers. This has not been borne by restaurants, including national chains such as McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts, as well as 15 local restaurants who have voluntarily made the switch. As mentioned previously by various restaurant owners, they have actually found this switch to be a minimal cost to them, as well as resulting in higher customer satisfaction and return rates. That was, as mentioned, in my hometown of Severna Park, Cafe Mezzanotte. He found it very beneficial, and then also his customers were very satisfied with that as well. There is no reason to assume that restaurants will raise their prices, but it is an absolute that taxpayers will be burdened to pay for styrofoam to either be emptied into a landfill or for the county to have it processed, densified by a private company in Crofton. The failure to pass this bill would not only most certainly result in increased costs for all county taxpayers, but it would further put our environment and community health at risk. So please pass this bill for our futures.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Appreciate it. Erica Jacobson.
Good evening. My name is Erica Jacobson, and I'm going to be a senior at Broadneck High School. I've lived in the Annapolis area for all 17 years of my life, so I know the natural beauty of this place. Many tourists come here on the weekends or the hot summers to enjoy the luxuries of what the Chesapeake Bay and Severn River have to offer. As time has gone by and an increase in expanded polystyrene foam production, some of these luxuries have gone to ruins. As I swim in the community beach, I feel uncomfortable to get into the water anymore because dead fish lie afloat on top of these mucky waters. Who wants to come to Annapolis for this? The answer is no one. I, as a citizen of this county, want people to come to this city and feel like they are in paradise. And once they leave, they want to instantly come back. With expanded polystyrene foam creeping into these waters, this dream of mine is far from achieving. No one will want to come back, which loses business and money for the area. As increasing amounts of styrofoam being produced and used, we are digging a deeper and deeper hole for ourselves. With this hole, future generations are going to have to fix it. Us, students, are going to have to find a solution. But what if it is too late? Why wait to spend thousands of dollars in restoration efforts to clean the waters when we can fix it now? When we can solve the problem now. Placing a ban on styrofoam is a step in the right direction. Spending a few extra cents on an alternative or more eco-friendly material will help the lives of thousands and even boost the surrounding economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Then this panel is dismissed. And let me, that concludes the sign-up, I believe. If anybody else would like to weigh in on this matter, please come forward now and take one of these seats. Okay, anybody else? Okay. One more gentleman. Thank you. And this will be the last call for testimony from the public. Okay, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, ladies of the staff. My name is Patrick Enright, I live on Huntwood Drive in Gambrels. I am in complete support of this banning bill, Bill 4918. And I wasn't going to speak tonight. I had no intention of speaking tonight until I heard the young lady a few minutes ago mention something about burning styrofoam. Polystyrene releases dioxin. Well, I was poisoned by dioxin while serving in combat operations in Vietnam 48 years ago, and the effects can be and are profound. Now, serving in combat operations and being poisoned is one thing, but coming home to the home and citizens and neighbors you defended and facing the risk of being poisoned by the same thing all over again, and having people like these young boys up here that were testifying in favor of the environment and banning this polystyrene is a whole different ballgame, and that really struck a nerve to me. So I want to add my weight as a single citizen to support, for another reason, environmentally, this Bill 4918. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. Appreciate it very much. Yes, sir.
My name is Ryan Kim. I'm from 347 Underwood Court. So I was going to talk today, but I'm the Vice President of Eco Action Team at Broad Neck High School. And expanded polystyrene foam is one of the big litters, along with plastic bags and that kind of things, that causes problems to our environment. I think styrofoam is one of the easiest ones to start, especially when you have so many alternatives, which might cost more for people when buying in bulk. But when they sell it, they probably have to include that in the cost when they sell it. So if people are selling it plastic, styrofoam plates, then they probably include that cost anyway. So, and the last time I was here, we said that alternatives were 2.5 times more expensive. So I don't think people will mind if they pay $250 right now, but pay $260 or when they paid $250 last time, but $260 this time. Mm-hmm. Also, someone brought that alternatives were not biodegradable, but even that's not good. Like plastic and that kind of stuff can be picked up, unlike styrofoam, which breaks down to small pieces that can't be picked up. Also, last time Mr. Grasso said that we have speed limits due to a small percent of people who goes really fast, which he named brain dead people. So why can't you have a ban passed for a percent of us who still reduce out in the driveways and parking lots, which leads into our waterways? And these are super light, so even if we throw them in the trash bins, they'll still fly out. And also, me and a couple other AP Environmental Science students have recently done a storm drain murals for the statewide watershed limit to get the message to students at Broad Neck. And the one thing I've learned is that anything that goes down the drain goes to a body of water nearby. And you probably heard facts today what that does.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Yes, sir. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Robert Ian Smith. I live at 1487 Chatham Court in Crofton, Maryland. I'm here tonight to testify in favor of Bill 4918. I think it's pretty clear at this point that there is a cost at using this type of product. So I think the question before you as the council tonight is who's paying for that cost? So is it going to be us as the taxpayers and then trying to clean up and mitigate all the issues that this product causes, or should it be on the business owners who use this product, or hopefully encouraging them to find an alternative, but having them on to it, as somebody had alluded earlier, is where they're externalizing one of their problems onto us as members of this county. So that was that's what I'm asking you as a council to consider is the fact that we shouldn't have to, let me paraphrase a quote that somebody I heard before, that if somebody's complaining about the cost of doing business and needs government help to do that, then maybe it's not the best use of resources for that we should be dedicating our resources as a society to the things that we need as a public. So with that, I'll leave my testimony there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Ma'am, good evening.
Good evening. I'm Susan Cochran. I live at 332 Hamlet Circle in Edgewater, Maryland. And for disclosure, I am a candidate for delegate from 30B, and as well as a lifelong advocate for the environment. I support the ban on the use of the EPS foam containers, primarily because it is detrimental to our fish and water life, who ingest the small particles as it breaks up, endangering their health and reducing the health of our fish and water life, as well as unsightly on our land and in the water. Now, testimony indicates that restaurants can accommodate to this law. I urge the passage of Bill 4918.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Ma'am, good evening.
Yeah, my name is Sydney Jacobs. I live at 2302 Lackawanna Street in Adelphi, Maryland, in Prince George's County, where we have had a very successful ban on foam in place for 2 years. EPS foams food service containers are the quintessential product that just should be eliminated from society. You've heard lots of testimony as to why this is, and I don't need to take more time to repeat these very convincing arguments. Opponents to this bill have tried to divert the conversation by citing false facts about recycling food service foam and minimizing its catastrophic environmental effects, particularly in marine ecosystems. Many much less harmful and affordable containers are available, and businesses are using them with no negative economic consequences to themselves or to their customers. Tonight, this council can make the moral, environmental, and aesthetic choice of reducing the plastic crisis in this corner of the world by passing a ban on EPS foam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will dismiss this panel here. Thank you very much for your testimony. And the public hearing on Bill number 4918 as amended is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 4918 as amended.
Bill number 4918 is amended, an ordinance concerning licensing food service facilities, polystyrene food service products.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Trumbull.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a moment and say I really appreciated the testimony and the debate today. I thought, we have a lot of issues that come before us, and they're not all as well thought out public discussions as this was. I did want to point out that, well, let me say this. If the taco guy is still here, I thought your testimony was excellent. I mean, what we had about 35 people show up by my count, Mr. Chair. 5 of them were industry lobbyists, and the rest were citizens coming to give their testimony. And I found that to be very compelling. And the fact that he was a real live restaurant owner that came and told us that they could do this no problem, and that it was a good thing to do really resonated with me. So thank you all for listening to the debate, and I urge you, please vote for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, did you? Oh, okay. May I ask a question, Mr. Trumbauer? What do you make, or would you respond to the argument that I'm looking at something that Ms. Shea passed up, this pie chart that indicates that there's a great number of restaurants and users who have voluntarily stopped using it. What do you make of the argument that then the legislation, the ban, might not be necessary in that there's success that's occurring?
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. My response would be just because there is a trend towards no longer using this material in restaurants doesn't mean that everybody will jump on board. And meanwhile, as we heard from several folks that were testifying, there is an external cost, whether it's to the environment or whether it's to the litter pickup. It's like anything else. When there's a trend downward, there's going to continue to be some folks that are either late adopters or won't do it. And that means that the resources needed to deal with that are going to, the ratio is going to get worse and worse. So if there's less and less of it around, we're still going to have to deal with it, but there's no economy of scale there. So I appreciate the fact that many in the industry are voluntarily moving that way, and I look at this information or this bill before us as a nudge to get everybody else on board. And again, I'll remind the council, Baltimore City just enacted a ban. Prince George's County and Montgomery County have had a prohibition for a while. Washington, D.C. has had a prohibition. So these are already programs that have been in place, and I'm asking Anne Arundel County to join the club.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Grasso, did you have, no?
No, I could go on. I could burn on another statement, but I'm just going to let it go.
Okay,
I said what I had to say.
I saw your light on, and that's why I was giving you the nod. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 4918 as amended.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Nay.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Nay.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Pruka.
Nay.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Bill number 4918 as amended is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 5018 as amended.
Bill number 5018 is amended.
Madam Secretary, let me interrupt you already.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please leave quietly. Appreciate your attendance. We still have other business that we're doing. Thank you. Madam Secretary, let's do that again. Please read the title of Bill 5018 as amended.
Bill number 5018 is amended, an ordinance concerning animal control, dogs outdoors, shelters, tethering.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso.
I pretty much said what I had to say, but there is some people that I would like to acknowledge that actually brought this bill into play, and was Mr. Hughes up here in the front. I also want to talk to, also give a knowledge to Miss Laura Henry, back over there. Stand up, Miss Henry. Okay? And Miss Jan Carlomata, if I'm saying it right. You three folks are the reason why this bill got into place, and you both, all three of you should take applause. And particularly, sir, the tears that you shed the day that you came in here resonated with me big time. I knew we had a problem. So thank you to all three of you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll now open the, I'm sorry, Mr. Marzik.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzik, the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Kern Ritter from the Office of Law, and Robin Catlett from Animal Control at the Police Department. We remain supportive of this bill and would ask you to pass it tonight. We spoke at length about this at the last meeting. We'd be happy to answer any questions council has.
Thank you. No discussion. We'll open the public hearing then on Bill number 5018 as amended. Do we have anybody signing up there? Lee Hughes, please. Yes, sir. Come on down. Good evening, sir. Please state your name and address.
All right. Lee Hughes, 109 Victor Parkway, Annapolis, Maryland. I do have a question about the temperature. It said somewhere in this that if it's below 32 degrees, is that just for tethered dogs? or over 90 degrees, you should have them inside. But that's not for dogs that are on a dog house, is it? Is it just for tethered dogs?
Mr. Grasso, do you want to respond?
That's, if I'm not mistaken, Officer Law, where are you at?
Right.
Good.
The tethering.
Please, I'm sorry, come on to a microphone and introduce yourself. Let's do it.
Curran Ritter from the Anne Arundel County Office of Law. The tethering provision does have the restriction on any tethering when the temperature is below 32 degrees or above 90 degrees. The animal shelter provisions come in place when by date. So December 1st through March 15th, there are the separate provisions requiring protections from colder weather, and then the summer months, there are the provisions for protections against warmer weather.
Thank you, sir. We're in the middle of your 2 minutes here, so complete your statement.
Okay. I forgot what the other thing was now. It's 45 days from today, if it's passed, that the bill comes into law. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, these people that have these beagles, they will be told after 45 days, do they have, I don't understand why they don't get some kind of a grace period where they can do something about it. The animal control just can't go out there and say, you're breaking the law, we got to take the dogs or whatever.
These are concerns you're expressing in your but we're not set up to take your questions and answer questions. So but if you have any other statements you'd like to make about passing the bill or not passing the bill,
no, I want to pass. Good grief.
Right. Well, then thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate that very much. Is there anybody else who would like to that there was the only sign up? Would anybody else like to weigh in on this matter? Please come forward at this time. This will be the last call. If anybody else wants to speak on this, come down and take a seat right now. Thank you. Name and address, ma'am. 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. My name's Sandra Salvatore, 721 Red Cedar Road in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm just here as a private citizen who has 2 dogs myself and just spent a lot of money on a fence so that my dogs can run free, and they are never outside unattended at any point in time. And I know the hardship it is, and maybe some of the drivers, I don't know a lot of the backstory, but as someone who is a citizen lobbyist for the Humane Society and the ASPCA, I spent the money to make sure my dogs have what they need to thrive, and I also pay for a dog walker when I work my 8 hours a day. So when I see dogs that are tethered for extended periods of time, that is a cause of concern on many different levels. One, it tells me that the owners not treating their dogs right, and they need to prioritize, and that owner might deserve some scrutiny. There's a organization called Humane Dominion in Northern Virginia, or in the Virginia area, that found that a lot of people who tether their dogs, one thing they find is that creates an aggression because the dog is under stress because it can't be itself, but also a lot of people who tether their dogs, and I don't know if that's what drove this, but I know a lot of people who tether their dogs are because they can't afford a fence like I could. And that's actually what they do, is they raise money to help people fence in their dogs so that they can then just have shelter and roam, and then they're also there to be protected and not outside for extended periods of time. So I'm just in support of this legislation that prevents people from doing that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down. Ma'am, your name and address, 2 minutes.
I'm Jan Camerata. I just have to always speak up. I have to always just speak up for the animals that are kennelled and mistreated and abused. As the dog is up the street from me, they feed the dog 1 cup a day so they don't have to pick up the droppings. Nobody wants to get involved to intervene with this dog because the owner is a nut. And I'm just happy that we made some steps to help these animals. And I'm just hoping that one day the weather provision could include dogs that are kennelled, and also and the legal weight. This man, I'm sure, keeps this, with the new 80-pound provision, I'm sure he will feed the dog less to keep it under that weight amount. So there's just some really bad people out there, and I appreciate, Mr. Grasso, what you're doing for these animals. It's every night I go to bed worried about this dog, have been for 8 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. The public hearing on Bill 5018 as amended is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 5018 as amended.
Bill number 5018 as amended, an ordinance concerning animal control, dogs outdoors, shelters, tethering.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 5018 as amended.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 5018 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 5118 as amended.
Bill number 5118 is amended, an ordinance concerning disposition of real property, transfer to governmental entities.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer.
It's an admin bill, Mr.
It's
Chair.
actually our bill, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick from the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Samantha Harris from Central Services, Jason Feder from the Office of Law. I would like to thank Mr. Trumbauer for his hard work in co-sponsoring this bill. We amended this at the last council meeting. We would ask the council to adopt this bill tonight.
We have amendment.
And we'd be
Thank
happy to
you.
answer any
Any
questions.
discussion? Any questions for the administration?
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
before they go, can you reiterate for the record the intent of, we got in a little bit of a discussion about this last time, but the intent of the type of property that that you wanted this legislation to apply to?
Most of the properties are small properties that are right-of-ways for utilities. A lot of times when these state entities or another government agency comes to us, they're working on a quick project. So the whole point of this proposal is for us to, instead of coming to the council 2 times, to only come once. And we understand that you guys were concerned about putting in the deed, the reverter clause, as well as what the use for the property was. And that's what our intention is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything further? We'll then now open the public hearing on Bill number 5118. If anybody would like to testify on this, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, we'll close the hearing on Bill number 5118 as amended. Oh. Ms. Johnson, you moved right on time, right before the...
For the hammer like that.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. I don't really, I'm sorry, Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I really, I don't claim to really know exactly how this bill is working, but what I do know is past experience. I testified before that in Herald Harbor, Valentine Road goes all the way to Valentine Creek, and that somehow the county officials decided that this property was not needed. That it could be abandoned and given to the private property owners, which was intended to cut off water access for the other existing 900 homes at that point in time. I am coming up with there's another instance here of a different kind of abandonment, or a claim, again, cutting off water access for people. And so I have real serious concerns about who is going to make the decision that the county doesn't need this. Who is going to decide that it's okay to declare it unneeded or surplus. The other one that I did mention but not clearly last time was the triangle of road located at the intersection of Old Forest Drive, Chinkapin Round Road, and abutting with Aris T. Allen. someone in the county decided that that land was not necessary. For anybody who uses Aris-T. Allen, Chinkapin Round Road, those roads are failing intersections. They're heavily overloaded. They knew that there was going to be, and yet they went ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you very much. The public hearing on 5118 is now closed. 5318, excuse me, is now closed. Madam Secretary, I understand there are amendments.
I'll read the bill in again for vote.
Please read the title of Bill 5118 as amended.
Bill number 5118 is amended, an ordinance concerning disposition of real property transfer to governmental entities.
Thank you. And I understand there are amendments. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2, this amendment removes quasi-governmental entities as an allowable requester of a transfer of surplus real property.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Pruski?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had some testimony at the last hearing, and my understanding in the county code, there is no defining definition for quasi-government entity. I think it's very broad and vague, and so I believe that this amendment could take care of that.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, again, same group at the table. We would ask you to oppose this amendment. I mean, I think there is the opportunity where we would have to transfer a property. We mentioned some of these entities. The Housing Commission, Arundel Community Development, Economic Development could be potentially this, Maryland Environmental Service, other organizations like that that would be these quasi-governmental. I don't know others off the top of my head, but in looking at this, so we would ask you to oppose this. I think, again, as we spoke about and reiterated at the last meeting and again tonight, this has to come before the council. So we can't move forward with this without council approval for any of these transfers. So you all have the final say on this, and for those reasons, we would urge you to oppose this amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Marzick, I am on board with the intent that there may be a time that we want to transfer it to MET or Maryland Environmental Service, rather, or the Housing Commission or something like that. What's compelling to me about Mr. Pruski's amendment, or what's interesting, is quasi-government entity isn't defined in the code. So would there be another way to articulate the type of agency that you're talking about without? I mean, when I first saw that, I was actually wondering, I wonder how that's defined, and then he said it's not defined. So
and we could craft a definition for it if you want to. I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge about what a quasi-government agency is, but
I mean, I don't. Is it common? I mean, would that stand the test of?
Jason Fetterman, Office of Law. Yes, it is a fairly common designation. It means any entity that has a governmental component, the imprimatur of government, on it. As Mr. Marzick said, we could craft a definition memorializing it. I know there was a concern expressed at the last hearing about P3s and whatnot falling in. We could exclude those types of entities with a definition.
I mean, I would be interested in that. What we may do. I mean, I might probably vote for this amendment, and then if it passes. If you wanted to come back with language that better articulated what you're doing, I mean, I would be open to that too. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Mr. Pruski, do you have anything else?
No.
Can I ask a question then? Just for clarity, I think what you said. There's no definition anywhere of quasi-governmental entity, not just in this section, but anywhere. Is that okay? That's what we're operating on. So that actually, it seems to me, does give a compelling nature to the amendment, because if we don't have a definition, how it's open-ended as to what somebody would call that, or something that could occur is open-ended, not defined. And Mr. Fetterman, you're saying that but this is a common usage.
It is a common usage, but as I said, it would not be difficult to craft a definition that I think would satisfy any concerns that the council would have.
Okay, I thank you. Appreciate it. Is there anything further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Grasso.
Nay.
Mr. Fink.
No.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye. Sorry.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
5 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 3.
Amendment number 3, this amendment limits real property that may be determined to be surplus and transferred to governmental entities to 5 acres or less.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Pruski?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we heard twice now, testimony brought forward, this is about right-of-ways and utilities and small properties, so I'm not sure why we wouldn't limit it to 5 acres or less. My concern is large properties. So again, I think this just limits it and defines and allows some leeway.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick?
Again, we're opposed. I mean, we're essentially narrowing it down so this is going to be impossible to use this section of code. I would urge you to oppose this. I don't understand the concern that's being raised on this. This has to come back to the county council, and nothing can happen without the council approval. So if the council thinks a project that's 6 acres or 10 acres is too large, then the council has the prerogative, obviously, to vote it down. I'm not sure putting a limit on this is necessary.
Thank you. Anything further? Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we've had a lot of discussion about, surplusing properties. In the inventory of properties that we have currently, I'm assuming you've gone through and taken a look at all of those that we have. What is like the median size of the properties? I mean, when we initially started this conversation, I think a lot of the discussion was about like paper roads, little parcels here and there. My impression was at that point that it wasn't about, larger parcels, but it was about, just getting rid of these little tiny like corners here and a piece there and a sliver here and there we're just hanging on to, and we could sell it and put it on somebody else's, they could,
right.
Somebody that's interested in it is adjoining and wants to buy it could buy it from us, and then they're paying property taxes on it, so great.
Right.
So do we have any like data on the size of the parcels and like where, and I guess if we have done like, let's say over the past, well, since maybe this administration, has there been any transfers that you all have done that would have qualified for this? And if so, are there examples of those that you could point to?
Sure, I'll defer to Ms. Harris on the data and on the examples, but your first point is about the non-buildable lots, right? So we have set up, that was a separate process that we set up, that you all set up for the non-buildables. This is now a third process that we're setting up for transfers to government entities.
Right, but
so
I'm just talking about...
You still have that existing, which are those slivers. I forget what the number we left, less than an acre, I think, was what we did for the non-buildables.
Right.
But I'll defer to Ms. Harris on...
I mean, is there a large inventory of these types of properties? And if there is, have there been transfers like that since you all have been doing what you're doing?
Since I've been here, no. I will say that there are properties such as Champion Forest where the state has actively been searching and trying to get us to transfer the property over, and we're actually probably going to be condemned. It's just that we can't move fast enough. We can't transfer over properties fast enough. And I think the important issue is that we would come to you and you would know exactly what we're trying to transfer over and why we're trying to transfer it over, because it would be placed in the deed. If they try to use that property for something other than what was in the deed, then it has to revert back to us. As far as the data...
So what's the size of that parcel, just out of curiosity?
There are 3 lots, and they're all less than 0.4.
Okay, got it, okay.
Quarter of an acre.
Okay.
And you asked about the data. Most of the properties are small. They're less than an acre. Every now and then we have a larger property, but then again, we have to follow the code and we have to come back to you.
What's the time difference that you're estimating between the solution this bill provides and what the process is currently? How much would it save?
Probably
That's the
about-
main driver, right, behind this bill,
Yeah.
is to speed up the process.
Well, you probably end up saving, I would guess, 2 to 3 months, realistic timeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's accurate.
Right.
And how many properties do we have that would qualify for this if we're not talking about the smaller ones?
Unfortunately, I'm not prepared with the data today, but I could pull it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fink?
what, I guess question to the sponsor, but what is the concern of a large property going through this procedure, being as it comes to the council? I mean, if it's 100 acres, the council has to approve it. I mean, we're not excluding the council from having a say in this. We're going to know all the details. The process is there. I just don't understand why 4 acres is okay, but 8 acres is not okay.
Well, I haven't been given any data in regard, we just heard testimony about what properties are included or not included. And also, we do have properties that could be purchased through a land acquisition program that could be surplused. So again, we have several bills going on here. I don't know what the true intention is, so I'm just putting in some breakers to make sure that we have. And plus, we had testimony that if this is truly about stormwater and utilities, I think anything under 5 acres makes sense.
But even if it's some of the properties in the beginning of your statement, I mean, it still has to come to the council. I mean, nothing is surplus without the county council saying okay. And at the time of us saying okay or no, we'll know the size of the property, and we'll know if it's quasi-government or not, and exactly who it's going to, and exactly what the use is. And it just seems like if the council's okay with this new process, it wouldn't matter if it's 4 acres or 1,000 acres. It wouldn't matter if it's quasi-government or not quasi-government. It wouldn't really matter much at all. If we're okay with the process, the council has a say. We're not giving up our say for small properties. We're not giving up our say for paper roads. We're not giving up our say for anything. We're keeping our say. We're just getting rid of some of the long bureaucratic red tape that's government's often all too well known for.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker?
Maybe for one of you all to answer. In the process as it exists now with these properties, first you have to ask us to surplus it. And then you have to come back and ask for the final sale, approval of the final sale, correct? So the final sale, does that include us looking at the appraisal as part of the final sale of the parcel in the current process?
In the current process, you would look at all of the material terms and conditions of the sale. So you would look at a draft of the agreement that the other party was going to sign, which would include the price, the location, all of the material terms whatsoever, and you would, excuse me, and you would approve that.
Okay.
So
in this process that's proposed, would we also see the price, the appraisal, and the whole packet of all of the process, or would we just be proving the surplus?
no, you would see all of the, you would see the purpose of the sale, you would see the appraisal, you would see everything that had been put together, and then you would approve that by one resolution, and then the central services officer would have the authority to go forth and dispose of it on the terms that were brought to the council previously.
But would that include the price?
The price would, yes, the price would be set forth. So you would know if they were selling below appraisal value or something of that nature.
So we'd have the entire same package under this bill that we would have under the current process. We'd have access to everything.
I can't say it would be the exact same package.
Okay, how does it differ?
They haven't put together.
It just sounds like, I'm sorry for.
No, that's okay.
It sounds like the way that reads, it looks like we would approve the ability to surplus the parcel, but we might not be involved in the actual transaction, which varies from the process we have currently, which would involve us after the transaction is all negotiated and all the terms are there, then we're looking at everything and then giving the final approval versus Right. What you're proposing is that we approve it to surplus, but don't actually have all of that same data.
Yeah, this would require the fair market value to be determined by the central services officer. So by reviewing an appraisal, and I know there's an amendment in to address appraisal issues in the future, if the assessed value is over 1,000. So you would have an assessed value and then you would have an appraised value.
But not the actual sale price.
Not the actual sale price.
So we wouldn't. So we have this actual sale price currently.
Right.
But we would not have the actual sale price if we approve this process.
Correct. What you would be saying is this is going to another governmental entity, so we are going to approve it going to this governmental entity for this purpose. We know what the value of the property currently is, so we are okay with this property being disposed of.
What if the let's just say hypothetically that the administration decided, oh, we're going to do land swap, or we're going to donate this land after there was an appraisal done. I mean, we're going to trade it for something, or we're going to give it up. I mean, there's no recourse for the council at that point to say, well, we don't really like that deal. We think we should get paid differently for it, or something for it, or that swap's not good. I mean, it just seems like we're sort of turning over our ability to approve the cost and the sale price of the parcel.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
I mean, the idea is that
All right,
we're doing this
glad.
to a government entity, right? I mean,
Right.
This is not for a private sale. This is not like other land that we're trying to dispose of. Again, we're just trying to speed up the process so that when we are going to another government, we have the ability to move more quickly.
Sure, but theoretically, there could be a situation where the county decides, like, or similar to like the state saying, hey, well, we just want to get rid of this land because we don't like the cost it incurs on us, on our budget, having to maintain it. So we'll give it to you if you ask for it, basically. I mean, we could turn around and do that same thing, right? I mean.
Well, there would have to be a purpose. It would have to be requested by another governmental entity. So let's take State Highway Administration because they're the most common. State Highway would have to make the request. They would have to have a purpose. The administration would have to put that purpose into the resolution. That was the prior amendment. So it's going to be used for stormwater maintenance. And then the deed would have a clause that if it's not used for that specific purpose, it would automatically revert back to the county.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Pruski? Ms. Tate?
I just wanted to follow up on the sequence, because the way the bill is worded, the appraisal isn't prepared or requested until after the county council approves it as a surplus.
Yes, the assessment is done. If the assessment is over $1,000, then the appraisal is viewed by central services.
So the council would not necessarily have that before them when they are required to make that decision.
They would have the assessment, but not the final appraisal.
Yeah, but they would have, you mean the state assessment?
Yes.
But not the actual value of the property?
Correct. They wouldn't have the appraisal document.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 3.
Mr. Grasso?
Nay.
Mr. Fink?
Nay.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Nay.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Nay.
3 in the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Amendment number 3 is defeated.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 4.
Amendment number 4. This amendment requires that the procedure for disposition include an appraisal by an independent real estate appraiser.
Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski.
Yes, I actually have experience because I am a former realtor, and I
didn't know that.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us what you haven't done, Mr. Pruski?
But I believe that adding language to have an independent real estate appraiser makes sense. Certainly, you've heard some of the arguments of concern, and I think that this provides not only transparency but also real value in terms of what the property's worth.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Fedman, I thought we just talked about the appraisal. Isn't there one being done already?
There would be an appraisal, but it's not required by the current bill to be, it's not required by the current bill to be an independent appraisal. It could be the state highways appraisal or some other appraisal that was done.
When we deal with other parcels, is it common to have the entity that's purchasing the property also do the appraisal, or?
I'll defer to Ms. Harris on the actual procedure.
Sorry,
There are some sections of the code that do require an independent appraisal and some that don't. I don't know what the numbers break down to be.
And it depends on the value of the land. If we feel like the appraisal that was done by the other entity isn't in line with what we think it should cost, we will get our own.
Mm-hmm. And how much is an independent appraisal cost? Just out of curiosity?
It really depends on the size of the property. It could be $1,500, it could be $3,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Marzick.
Again, we're trying to create a streamlined process here when we're solely transferring the properties to a government entity, and this would again be something to slow down that process, which really defeats the purpose of what we've been trying to accomplish with this. So I would ask you to vote against this amendment.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Marzick. So we've talked tonight about the process would be the council will have a say on any transfer. So I guess my question is, if in the future, under these provisions, you came to the council wanting to do a transfer and you had the property appraised by DPW or SHA, if the council said, we don't like this, go out and get an independent appraisal, I mean, is that an appropriate conversation for that resolution?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, you can request anything. You can request that, it not be used for X, it be used for Y.
Right. Because I mean,
you have the ability to reject it for any reason.
I'm very sympathetic to you guys have, a right-of-way ditch you want to give SHA. You shouldn't need to get that appraised, right? But now that the 5-acre amendment was defeated, I think, now I'm thinking there may be some instances where the council would want to make sure there was an independent appraisal, but you're saying that's built into the process, that we would be able to see what you have appraised it and say, we don't like this, go out, and we're not going to pass this until you go out and get an independent appraisal.
Right. I mean, if we came to you and said, we'd like to surplus Quiet Waters Park to the state for them to, build a drag racing strip.
You're not going to do that, right?
Right, exactly. Okay. So,
I mean, I know I'm a lame duck and all, but that's a little scary.
But we're looking at, working with a government agency, a state, other county, city of Annapolis, whatever it may be, that we think deserves a different process to speed this up. So I think there's that check and balance in there. And again, coming to the council can very easily say, no, you can't do this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Frisky.
Yes, Ms. Tate, I just want to be clear, and we could ask Mr. Fredman the same question. The council can't commit an executive agency to do anything. Am I correct? The way I interpret the charter?
Yes, under 309, you can't direct a member of the executive branch to do a particular task on your behalf.
So while it may be a statement that we want an appraisal, unless we pass this amendment or it's clarified in the charter, they are not required to do so.
Well, no, I mean, they have to get an appraisal, and in your amendment, as you requested it, is unlike some other provisions in the code where someone from DPW or Central Services might do the appraisal of the property. Your amendment suggests or requires that someone from outside of the agency do the appraisal. Now there's still the limiting factor. If the internal assessment, if the assessment is $1,000 or less, like maybe Mr. Trumbauer's drainage ditch or whatever, they wouldn't have to do that under the bill. But what you're asking for is, if it's more than that $1,000 based on whatever this assessment is in the record, that you have to go outside, no matter what.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Fink.
Now, would we be donating this property in some instances, the State Highway Administration just giving it to them, we don't need it, they can have it to widen Route 3 or Mountain Road or whatever.
In my tenure here, that no one has ever asked us to just give them a property like that. They've always come to us with a number. Always.
I'm just wondering if we're forcing us to spend money on appraisal to essentially give money to another government entity. Because that's essentially what we're doing. I mean, when we're giving away this property in this process, we're doing it to benefit still our citizens more than likely. We're not selling it to a developer by any way, not through this process. We're selling it to another government agency that's going to have more than likely have a public use because that's the only uses that they have. And we're going to force an appraisal paid just to simply transfer it over to Peter DePaul, and it's still not going to a developer. So even at the end of the day, if you guys were to give the value of the property away for a discounted rate, I just don't see how it really matters at the end of the day. Smiling thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 4.
Mr. Grasso.
Nay.
Mr. Fink.
Nay.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
No.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
2 in the affirmative, 5 in the negative. Amendment number 4 is defeated.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 5.
Amendment number 5, this amendment requires that transfers for less than the appraised value shall be approved by additional resolution of the County Council.
Motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Pruski.
I think this is pretty self-explanatory, Mr. Chairman. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Marzick.
Again, we would ask you to oppose this amendment. The purpose of doing this is to transfer properties to a government entity. We're trying to streamline that process by removing the second step of that process, which will be coming back to the council. This amendment would be requiring that second step to come back in, and we would urge you to vote against this.
Thank you. Anything further?
Mr.
Trumbauer.
Quick question. Would you envision a scenario where we would transfer property for no money between the agencies? Like, would we give SHA a ditch, or?
I mean, I presume it could happen. I mean, if your property is worth $1,000, are you going to need to charge State Highway Administration for?
Yeah, well, I was, right, and so I was wondering if this would come into play in that scenario.
You just turned it off.
Oops, sorry. We did this about a year ago to the Housing Commission, and we transferred it for $1. But we came to you. It was a long process just to transfer it for them to build more homes on the property.
Thank you. Nothing further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 5.
Mr. Grasso.
Nay.
Mr. Fink.
Nay.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
3 in the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Amendment number 5 is defeated, although I apologize, Mr. Trumbauer, you voted?
I was a no on the amendment.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker was an aye.
Okay. 3 in the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Amendment number 5 is defeated.
Thank you. Bill number 5118, as amended, will be heard on July 2nd, 2018. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill numbers 5318.
Bill number 5318, an emergency ordinance concerning acquisition of real property, advanced land acquisition capital project.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, the County Executive's Office, with me to table, John Hammond from the Budget Office, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. Bill 5318 is a bill that we discussed numerous times during the budget discussion. This creates a procedure that requires the adoption of a resolution by the council for the purchase of real property that utilizes funds appropriated in the advanced land capital project. Should this bill pass, the administration will be required to bring any potential land purchase using this fund for final approval of the council. And of note, this bill is an emergency bill, so when it goes into effect, when it passes, it will go into effect immediately. We did this so that the bill would be in effect before the new fiscal year began. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Unlike the last bill, this is a specific category that deals with, obviously, a couple pieces of properties that are, at least right now, for the moment, in this category. And sort of related to that last question, or that last bill that we amended, at least with one of the amendments, are you stating that if we pass a resolution, so the bill requires and this is maybe for the Office of Law, Ms. Kosmeyer, if we pass a resolution or do not pass a resolution on a particular piece of land, that is a binding activity and that the county executive, so if we said no, could he still purchase the land?
No.
No. No.
That's the language that we're adding into this bill, Mr. Smith, says that each agreement for the purchase of real property utilizing funds from the land acquisition capital project shall be contingent upon approval of the purchase by resolution of the council. So in order for you to purchase a piece of property, the council must pass a resolution.
Can you also give us a legal opinion on that, just for the records? I know you said that, and the Office of Law said that on testimony here tonight, but could there also be an opinion from the Office of Law stating to that effect, obviously, if this passes tonight, so that we have that for the record?
Something in writing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a follow-up to the point that Mr. Smith was making, and I think I agree with you guys at the table, but I think the price would not necessarily be binding, right? I mean, you're requiring us to adopt a resolution approving the purchase, but what if you submit a purchase, or you submit a resolution that says we're going to buy this parcel? Is that resolution going to have the price in it?
That's the exact, yes, that's the exact question I asked earlier today based on the auditor's Blue Note. If we're looking to purchase a property for $100, we're going to have that agreement in place before bringing it to the council to purchase that property for $100, right? So that has to happen. We're going to be able to tell you that price, because otherwise we're going to come to you and say, we've got a piece of land, we're going to buy it.
Right. That was the concern expressed during the budget. Yeah.
Correct. So that, to answer your first question, yes, you're going to have the price there because you're going to approve the purchase of the property. The price would have to be included in the purchase of the property. So that's one. But two is if we come down and say we're going to buy this piece of land for $100, council approves it for $100, we can't then go and buy that property for $110.
Okay,
or $95.
That's the part I'm interested in.
Right.
So you're saying that the resolution that would come before the council would have a price included or referenced.
Right.
And you're saying that the administration would be bound to that price.
Correct.
That's in conflict to what I think
Well, I
thought,
like,
right?
I've always heard
Thank you,
that
Mr.
resolutions are, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Madam Auditor.
Resolutions are not legally binding, so information in the resolution, such as an intended purchase price, would not legally bind the administration to that purchase price. Is that correct, Lori?
Lori Blair, Classmar, Deputy County Attorney. No. There are certain resolutions that you're correct that are not binding, but when you have a piece of legislation, a code section that says that something has to be approved by the county council by resolution, then that is binding. So if we come down with a contract and the contract says $1 million, you can't sell it for $700,000. We'd have to come back to the council, and we've had those kinds of contingency provisions in other contracts over the years, and that's always been the advice we've given, that if the council has to approve something by resolution under the code, as opposed to just passing a resolution recommending something, asking for the administration to do something, those kinds of resolutions are not binding. But when it's an approval by resolution required by the code, then it's binding.
Okay. And then...
And that's what my opinion will say.
So there is an opinion that we can refer to on this?
No, that's what Mr. Smith was asking for.
Okay. And in the bill, as written, does it say you have to put the purchase price in the resolution? I was just trying to quickly read it here.
Well, it says that the agreement
to purchase is going to be contingent on approval of the purchase by resolution. So we're going to have an agreement that's going to have terms and conditions.
And one of the contingencies within that agreement is going to say, this is contingent upon the county council's approval by
Approving it.
resolution.
And it can't move forward without that. So if for some strange reason the price isn't in there, the council can say no until such time as they get that information that they want.
Thank you. Mr. Pruski.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Similar to the prior bill, Ms. Klossmeyer, I was curious if there was an intended purpose brought in front of the council, that does not hinder the administration from changing the purpose of once the land is purchased, correct? So if it was intended to be used for a dog park and all of a sudden it turns into a stadium, that wouldn't have to come in front of the council with only the purchase and surplus of that land, correct?
Well, no, the budget funds would have to be approved for that purpose.
Well, I guess my only comment on that is it depends on whether it's a term of the agreement. The purpose is a term of the agreement.
So it specifically have to state.
Because I don't think this project, this particular capital project, has the purpose listed for the particular property.
That's
so
correct.
the question would be whether it's listed in the agreement of the purpose. And if it's a lease, usually you have a statement of intent. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski. Anything further? We will now then open the public hearing on Bill number 5318. If anybody would like to testify on Bill 5318, please do so now. Do I see movement? I see movement.
No, Ms. Johnson.
Oh, get the papers here.
Ms. Johnson, good evening.
Chairman, members of the council, I don't know much about this, but I do have really serious concerns about the Supreme Court case Kelo versus New Haven. When the government decides about the disposal of property, you really need to protect the rights of the people. Now, presumably, as I understand the bill, it's not exactly privately owned property. Somehow the county has a claim to it. But conversely, the people who live in the county are, the ultimate property owners, control, and in this case, ceded to the government. But that imposes a really high duty on the government to do the job right. And that the population is really restless out there. There are a lot of people who are really unhappy with the government. I listen to C-SPAN in the morning, and I'll tell you, the Republicans call in, and they're upset. And the Democrats call in, and they're upset. And the independents call in, and they're upset. They're just, and it's not just anger, it's fear, it's worry. The government is out of control. So when you make these, when you deal with creating this kind of legislation, please remember your responsibilities to all the people and protecting the rights of all the people, because there is such a conviction from observations from a lot of these people that it's one side or the other that's getting tremendous benefits, and a lot of the other people are losing, whether it's cash that they're paying out or the loss of the quality of life. The diminution of the quality of the environment, the workplace, the security of living in the communities that they're comfortable in, because the rate of change is so fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The public hearing on Bill number 5318 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5318.
Bill number 5318, an emergency ordinance concerning acquisition of real property, advanced land acquisition capital project.
Any further discussion?
There's an amendment. There's an amendment.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, this amendment requires certain appraisals or studies to be conducted before approval by resolution of the County Council of the purchase agreement of real property.
Thank you. Motion to adopt.
Second.
Thank you. This is an administration amendment?
Nope.
Mr. Smith. Now it's Mr. Smith. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Mr. Chair, so with this particular category, unlike the previous where they were disposing of land, this is us committing ourselves to actually acquiring and obtaining land for the future. And so I have not made these requirements secret by any nature. I mentioned it at the last county council meeting that we had. I even texted to the county executive as well. And essentially, what I was asking for is before we even get to the point where we're going to have a resolution on the particular purchase, that part of that package of data that comes to us is an appraisal, an environmental study, and a feasibility study. And the reason I think it was important to do that, particularly with the Brooklyn Park site, we potentially are committing ourselves to upwards of $22 million to purchase that land. In reality, we're going to use bond money to do that. Mr. Hammond, what's the current year rate on bonds? So if we bond some, what is the interest rate that we're using right now with bond money?
I think the refunding that we did was done at a rate of around 3.25.
So 3.25. So this is bond money. So if we commit this particular project, at least the one that I'm most interested in, is $22 million. If you add that 3.25 over 30 years, somewhere in a range of $12 to $15 million over 30 years. So we're committing ourselves to probably $35 million to $40 million for that land. And that doesn't that does not include the cost of getting it prepared to even build one, which could also be another 10 to 15, if not $20 million. So in essence, if we purchase this property, we could spend upwards of $50 to $70 million before we build one swing set on that property. And so I think it's prudent for us to ensure that we have a environmental study, a feasibility study, and an appraisal on that land before we even get a resolution to actually purchase. So we have all the data, so we walk into this knowing what we're getting into. We would do it on our houses. If you're buying a house in your community or for your family, you would have all of those things in place so you know exactly what you're getting into before you commit yourself to those funds. And so all I'm asking, at least for this category, that we require those three things be in place before we even approve the purchase of the land. So at least we understand what we're committing ourselves to over the 30-year process. So I just think that's a fiscally sound thing to do, to invest $100,000 or $50,000 getting this data before we commit $50 million of our purchasing power to obtain this land. So that's what this amendment does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, this doesn't seem really necessary, but we wouldn't oppose this. It sounds like this is standard procedure from talking with the folks in 10 minutes or so to review this amendment. I know your original version had or and the one that came up as a question was whether a feasibility study is necessary for every purchase under this, but if this is the council's wish to have all three done, then we would obviously follow that.
Just to add, one size doesn't fit all, yet we make rules here that says one size fits all, and it can be an encumbrance in some unforeseen circumstance. I know we have one property that the seller is very anxious to settle and move forward with, and we probably will have a resolution down here absent this requirement in a short order, and that's the Turtle Run property. The seller is very anxious, and there's an example of perhaps where one size doesn't fit all. So I would just offer a little bit of caution. And again, it gets back to some of the discussion on the previous bill, that if you're not satisfied with the information that we're providing, you can reject the proposal. You've got that option. But putting these handcuffs on doesn't give us the option of, hey, look, there's a special circumstance because of this, that, or the other. And I think we ought to try to leave ourselves a little bit of flexibility.
Thank you, Mr. Fink.
Thank you. Mr. Marzik, you started to touch on this, but the feasibility study, if we were going to do a feasibility study for, a park, when I think of feasibility studies, I think about the amount of money that, the Board of Education or we even spend with schools, and, they're six-figure studies. What would be the cost of a feasibility study for a park? Ballpark, tens of thousands?
I don't know that off the top of my head. Maybe Mr. Thanks.
Bless you.
Appreciate that. Right in my face. Mr. Phipps will hopefully have an answer to that as to what it'll be.
Thank you. Chris Phipps, Director of Public Works. Of course, everyone is a little different, but what we're describing here, feasibility, is what can the property yield in terms of satisfying the county need. 2 middle schools, an elementary school, and a high school. How big is the park? We're not getting into engineering details necessarily. We're getting into configuration. Typical sizes of a building, typical sizes of the field supporting that building. Can it fit on the site? So we're talking maybe, it could be a $10,000 to $15,000 effort or less, depending upon how much detail we need and how much available information we already have.
So we wouldn't hire an outside company to do this? We could do a feasibility study in-house?
We could, but typically we have hired out, but it's $5,000
Sure.
to hire out.
The environmental study, is that something we do on all properties that we purchase?
We have made it a practice to do an environmental study on anything we're purchasing, and it's not necessarily a phase one. We'll do a phase one EA if it's a large parcel and it has known contaminants or suspected contaminants and things like that. But if we're just buying a frontage along somebody's property for a sidewalk or a widening strip, we would do what we call a short form environmental assessment, which is basically a desktop survey of available information at MDE and EPA and available websites to determine if there's anything known about that property.
Sure. And then, in this amendment, it calls for an environmental study and a feasibility study. Is a feasibility study essentially whatever you want it to be?
It would be basically what we are proposing that property to be used for. Can it fit, and can we configure our site to accommodate that?
And it sounds like we would do a feasibility study on any significant piece of property that we're going to purchase.
Well, absolutely. That's what I think
it's
Bernie had mentioned. It's our practice to do that. We're not going to move forward on properties that aren't going to meet our needs.
Makes sense. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. Mr. Prisky.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a question either for the law office or Ms. Tate, and it just came to mind because this council frequently passes resolutions where they're announced and passed the same evening. So we're talking about, rushing things and public notice. I just want to be clear, when we pass a resolution for purchasing property, is it possible that in one evening it could be introduced and the public wouldn't, have time to testify and then move on? I want to be clear about this process.
If the rules are suspended, yes, but normally there's a 7-day waiting period built into the rules. Unless it's a ministerial act, which this is not. But yeah, you would be the next meeting unless you have 5 votes to vote on it the same night.
Okay, so the difference is, though, for a bill, that, we would have a longer public notice and time.
Well, a bill has constitutional advertising requirements, so we comply with those. And resolutions do not. There is no advertising requment.
And see, that's the thing that concerns me right there.
It's published by way of our schedule and on our website, and that's how people come to know about them. But there's nothing in the paper.
But let me be absolutely clear. So when we're purchasing a property, comes in front of the council as far as the resolution, there is no requirement to post it in the paper.
No, there is.
Besides the website. Our meeting.
But that is our requirements within our rules that require that the resolution be out there so the public knows about it. The 7-day requirement is there. However, in many instances, it is waived by virtue of a suspension of the rules.
Thank you.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions, maybe they're technical. I know what an environmental assessment is, and I know what an environmental impact statement is. This refers to an environmental study, and I just wanted to make sure that that was the correct term to refer to. I mean, if you guys know what an environmental study is, and this will direct you to do what you need to do, that's fine, but I wasn't sure if that was accepted language.
On a large parcel like this, we do a Phase 1 EA, and then that may require a Phase 2. So whether you say that...
I'm sorry, but so you're saying your interpretation of this would drive you to an environmental assessment, Phase 1, Phase 2? Okay. So you're not worried about the language of an environmental study? Does Office of Law have any issue with that? I'm fine with it if you guys are fine. I just want to make sure we're preserving the intent of the sponsor's amendment, because it occurs to me there could be some ambiguity in that term.
I think environmental study is broader than the formal environmental assessment that Mr. Phipps is talking about, Phase 1, Phase 2.
Sure.
But I think he also indicated that there are times, depending on the property, that we don't do a full environmental assessment Phase 1. We do something that's a more abbreviated, based on the size of the property, location of the property, use of the property, that sort of thing. I think that this language would permit that to continue.
And I'm going to go ahead and make Mr. Marzik's testimony for him that this would be within the power of the council, if we were unsatisfied with this environmental study, to direct them to do a different kind. Yeah. And then the same thing with the feasibility study. I only know that term because it's what the Board of Ed does with the school. Do you guys generally do feasibility studies? Like, is that a known term for land acquisition or project planning on this side of the house?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes,
that's fine.
we do.
Stop. That's good. Yes. I got it. I'm just making sure we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further? Real quick. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll on amendment number 1?
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
6 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Okay. Okay. Well, one size doesn't fit all. Okay. Madam Secretary,
We can
call the roll on this.
we're going to call the roll on the bill.
I'll read it in as amended first.
Please read the title of Bill number 5318 as amended.
Bill number 5318 is amended, an emergency ordinance concerning acquisition of real property, advanced land acquisition capital project.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 5318.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Nay.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
6 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Bill number 5318 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 5418.
Bill number 5418, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, fourth quarter fund transfer, and supplementary appropriations.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Stephen Theroux from Budget Office, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. 5418 makes multiple fund transfers and closing out the current fiscal year. This is our fourth quarter transfer bill. The first transfer is $2.1 million to various departments, including Transportation, Central Services, Finance, DPW, and Rec and Parks. Second, the bill also addresses supplemental appropriations from revenues received from sources not anticipated in the budget from other numerous sources, and we'll be offering an amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any discussion, Madam Auditor?
I wanted to bring to your attention that in my blue letter on page 3, I included a table of our estimates of their need versus what's requested. And in that table, there is a number for the National Business Park North Special Taxing District, where I have that they need another 200,000. However, since I did this analysis on Friday, somebody booked a journal entry in the system which corrected an error that was in there, and so that 200,000 is no longer applicable. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the auditor for calling our attention to the blue letter, because it reminded me I did have a question about this one. And you have the blue letter in front of you, maybe? Thank you. Okay, so I understand there's, some modest disagreements on what a department has available and what they don't. The only one that really caught my eye that was a big difference was the Department of Public Works line under the general fund, where you've requested $1492 and an auditor says you need $255. So that's $1.2 million in a difference of opinion. Can you add a little insight into what that funding is going towards, or why there might be a discrepancy?
Sure. For the record, Stephen Through from the Budget Office. We've since reviewed the numbers and actually agree with the auditors. Our estimate is done probably about 6 weeks ago at this point. We had a different set of assumptions specifically about electricity and public works that came to fruition through actually the budget process, where the assumptions we were using to build the fourth quarter bill were not true in terms of a rebate for electricity that happened in the current year. So that's almost $1 million swing just in that number alone.
Okay. And so will the amendment address that?
No. So in addition, if we apply it to Public Works and the Public Works does not spend that appropriation, it's going to fall to general fund balance. If we leave it in the CEO contingency account where this money is coming from, it'll fall to fund balance. So at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference. It's going to fall to the general fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
But the important thing is your numbers now match the auditor's numbers. So at least we'll know what's happening with the money.
Yes, and there's always the claim that if it stays in their budget and they don't spend it, it'll drop to fund balance. And if it stays in the contingency, it'll drop to fund balance. But the question is, if it goes in their budget and then in the next couple of days before they lock out the purchase orders, they go and encumber something that they weren't intending to buy this year. That's a possibility, not a probability. So I just want to put that out there.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Mr. Marzik, you wouldn't do that, would you?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. It settles that.
It's on the record.
So, anything further? We'll now open the public hearing on Bill number 5418. Is there anybody who wishes to testify on Bill number 5418? Seeing no movement, the public hearing on 5418 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 5418.
Bill number 5418, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, fourth quarter fund transfer, and supplementary appropriations.
Thank you. There is an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment corrects the funding allocation for the Chief Administrative Officer General Fund appropriation from personal services to supplies and materials, increases the appropriation for the Office of Administrative Hearings by $10,000, and recognizes a fund balance of $100 in the Woodland Preservation Sinking Fund.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt?
So moved, Mr.
Second.
Madam Secretary, okay. Mr. Marz.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion, any questions? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Pruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you. And since this is emergency ordinance, we can vote on it tonight, right? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 5418 as amended.
Now I'm going to read it in as amended first.
All right.
Okay. Bill number 5418 as amended, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, fourth quarter fund transfer, and supplementary appropriations.
Thank you. Any final discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 5418 as amended.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 5418, as amended, is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 5518.
Bill number 5518, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, Board of Education, supplementary appropriation, and transfers of funds.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table is Alex Sheknovich from the Anne Arundel County Public Schools, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, and Matt Stansky from Anne Arundel County Public Schools. 5518 appropriates over $23 million to the Board of Ed and transfer funds along categories of expenditure in the local education fund. I'll defer to Mr. Sheknovich, Mr. Stansky, if the council has any questions on this.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbo.
Thank you, sir. I read the blue letter. I saw that the analysis was everything's in order, but I mean, we're moving a lot of money around, and so I just was hoping that you could provide some detail on that.
Madam Auditor.
Yes. What I wanted to point out is that this has an error, a couple errors in there due to my late night writing of this letter. The third line in that paragraph there starts with the number 5,548,600 of additional county contribution. You should cross out all those letters because that's not applicable to this legislation. Secondly, it says that they are getting an additional $23 million of appropriation. They are not. They're only getting an additional $11 million of appropriation. And the rest of it, they're moving around within their own categories from one line item to another. So besides that, there is no additional money coming from the county for these purposes. It's their own fund balance, their own categories, their additional grant money that they got that they didn't expect.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Mr. Pruski.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, even though I believe this has no ethical considerations, my spouse is an employee of the Board of Education. I usually announce that during any votes of exchange of funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski. Mr. Trumbo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't help it, but I have to ask the Board of Ed folks, can you just give us the quick, top-level summary of what this is doing? It's very hard to see it looking at the bill, the way the bill is constructed. It just lists a bunch of dollars. But what's this going to do?
For the record, Alex Sheknovich. Really, there's, as Ms. Dickinson said, there's really three sources of revenue categorically. First is Board of Ed and local revenues, about $5.5 million of previously unanticipated revenue that has come to the board since the budget adoption and the second quarter transfer. That really comes from two main sources. One is the federal E-rate program. About $2.5 million of that came from the federal E-rate program. About $1.34 million of it came from investment interest income. While we're still in a very low interest rate environment, it has slowly been ticking up. So month over month, we've been aggregating a little bit more interest than we previously anticipated. So that's the bulk of the 5.5 is really tied into those two. Everything else is just kind of almost like a rounding error. $573,000 between the federal and state government. On the general fund side, we had an increase of $566,000 of federal impact aid money. We had a offsetting decrease in state monies of $539,000. That's on the general fund side of it. And on the on the restricted side of it, we had an increase of $373,000 in federal government's grants distributed amongst about 12 different title grants, some pluses, some minus, and on the state side, about $425,000 in additional state income spread amongst 4 restricted grants. And then finally, the unappropriated fund balance in the local education fund, we had set aside at the conclusion of our last fiscal year $5 million, and that was spoken to in our CAFR, et cetera, so that we could utilize it at year end to make an acquisition. So that was sort of declared and set aside on purpose. The rest of it are these categorical from 2 shifts because our budgets are spread amongst 14 state categories, and we not just have to balance at a budget line at the bottom line, but we have to balance within each and every one of those 14. We only use 13 of those state categories locally.
And Mr. Chairman, so am I correct, Mr. Sheknovich, that the net action for this will be removing monies from the list in Section 2 and putting them into the list in Section 3?
Correct.
And so I can't help but notice we're taking $3.6 million out of instructional salaries and wages. You will no doubt remember this council put a considerable amount of effort into putting a lot of money into that category. I'm sure there's a very good reason for why you're making this transfer, but can you just tell us that reason?
Sure. So remember, to begin with, these transfers are one time, so these aren't recurring forever transfers, right? But essentially, they're a culmination of positions that were authorized but unfilled.
I see.
So
this
mid-year
is
departure, or we could have a hire that was, we estimated we're going to hire somebody at $53,000, but they came in at $49,000. So it's a lot of dribs and drabs, but across the teaching workforce of 6,500, or so people, every 2 weeks we don't get a paycheck to somebody, does add up.
But, and so as you said, those funds are what we would call one-time funds, so presumably they're being reprogrammed into other one-time.
Right, and if you take a look in the 2 category below, the biggest beneficiary is really textbook and classroom supplies, and then right below that, other instructional activities. So they're really staying in the instructional arena for instructional purposes. It's not like they're getting moved out to admin or something like that, which is always the fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Mr. Grasso.
Hey, listen, just out of the thinking thing over here, how exactly, when, in other words, the federal government gives you money, do they send you a check? Do they send it certified? What do they do? How do you actually get $3 million or $5 million? It shows up in the mailbox?
It's rolls of pennies. Would you believe it? It's rolls of pennies.
It wouldn't surprise me.
For the record, Matt Stansky, Director of Financial Operations for the board. And most of the time, it's actually funneled through the state of Maryland. So the state of Maryland gets so let's use Title I, for example, which is a big grant award from the federal government. It goes, and the award goes from the federal government to the state of Maryland, and then the state of Maryland applies a formula and then distributes that funding to the 24 LEAs in Maryland.
Got it. So you guys have a check in a bank account, right?
Yeah, so we actually have to spend the money and then ask for reimbursement from the state.
Yeah, but I mean, you have a bank account that you actually write these checks out of. So how does the money get from the state of Maryland to you? Do they send you a check in the mail?
It's
Is it
usually
a wire transfer?
It's a wire transfer.
Wire transfer.
Yep.
And then they send you notification, hey, we're sending you some money. Is that pretty much how it goes?
Correct. Yeah, they give you a schedule of when money's coming throughout the year, and then you expect the wire to come, and you check, and you get a notification.
Like that?
Yep.
Okay. Just want to clear the picture. Maybe they'll send me a check one day. I don't know.
It's one of those big cardboard ones.
Right. Big cardboard ones.
Yeah.
Publishers Clearinghouse. Like I said, when somebody asked me that question, I don't know. So I said, let me ask.
Let's move along. Anything further? Then we'll. Madam Auditor.
Yes. When you were answering Mr. Trumbauer's question, you talked about the sources of where the money was coming from, but not a lot about what are you going to spend the additional $11 million on that you're getting. One piece was the $5 million that you set aside last year in fund balance. You didn't specify what that's for. I think it was some kind of computer software or something like that.
Again, for the record, Alex Sheknovich, we've got about 18,500 Google Chromebooks that are reaching end of life or won't be supportable as of October of 2018. So we're placing the order as late as possible at year's end, such that we can receive the machines just before summer ends in August and fully image them, get them loaded with the appropriate software, the firewall technology, et cetera, so that they can be deployed into the schools and have the new ones up and running before the old 18,500 computers go end of life in October of 2018.
That was $5 million. The others?
The vast majority, the rest of it went into networking, network wiring, hubs, routers, and switches to enhance the connectivity and Wi-Fi capacity of our building. In addition to that, we had a tremendous amount of computers that are one-time purchase, came through capital funds, et cetera, not part of our lease purchase program, those were expiring as well, things that were funded through our Look to the Future Science initiative, et cetera. So those computers have been 5 to 6 years since they were purchased as part of the CIP program. Again, but not part of our lease purchases one time, these were expiring as well. So it's mostly computer hardware, and then computer infrastructure is the biggest component of that, and that's why it's in that category.
Thank you. All done. All right, well then, if that's the case, we will now open the public hearing on Bill number 5518. Seeing no movement, oh, no, there's see movement. Good evening, Ms. Johnson.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I want to thank you members of the council for asking for clarification about what's really going on in this bill, or this piece of legislation. Because every year I come forward and I say, you do this every year. It is not an emergency. It's planned. And we're moving around large sums of money. Where is the scrutiny, the supervision, the accountability, or just the plain visibility to the public, the taxpayers who are paying these bills? And the taxpayers are feeling pretty crunched at this point in time. I was talking to a young man, and he's bought his first condominium, and he's really excited. And he discovered that his property taxes, or whatever they were, and he was going, I didn't know it was going to be that much, because, well, he didn't know. Now, how could he be that financially illiterate, even though he's a college grad? We don't really do an adequate job of that. But he's a good and decent citizen, and part of it is that we just simply don't inform the public. So I really appreciate your pursuing the question, asking Mr. Sheknikovich and the people from the board. And I want to thank Jody Dickinson for her efforts here to clarify this for the public. But I do hope that you'll start thinking about maybe this isn't an emergency legislation, and maybe we can really open it up to the public so they can see and understand what's happening and how it's happening, because it's a fair question. Does the money come in a check or in rolls of pennies, or in whatever form? I thought that was fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Appreciate it. What I found interesting was that we have to spend the money and then have to ask for it. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but here we go. The public hearing on Bill number 5518 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5518.
Bill number 5518, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, Board of Education, supplementary appropriation and transfers of funds.
Thank you. Is there any last discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 5518.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 5518 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 5618.
Bill number 5618, an ordinance concerning personnel, classified service, exempt service.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick from the County Executive's Office with me at the table, Andy Rhodes, personnel, and Kelly Lovett from the Office of Law. 5618 implements the negotiated agreements for all 12 bargaining units for fiscal year 2019. It also includes the approved pay package for eligible non-represented and exempt employees, as well as employees of the state's attorney's office, circuit court, and soil conservation for fiscal year 19. We would be happy to answer any questions the council have, and we'll be offered amendments at the appropriate time.
Are there any questions for the administration? Well, then, thank you. We will open the public hearing on Bill number 5618. Seeing no movement, the public hearing on Bill number 5618 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5618.
Bill number 5618, an ordinance concerning personnel classified service exempt service.
Thank you. There are amendments. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
This technical amendment removes an inadvertently typed letter C in Section 5 of the bill and corrects a typographical error in Section 8 of the bill as a D4 pay schedule does not exist.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment clarifies that fire department employees on the F7 through F9 pay schedules shall receive a 2% increase in pay, not to exceed the maximum pay rate for the grade, effective the first full pay period beginning on or after July 1, 2018.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chair, members of council, these are just, this amendment and the next one are just minor amendments that were mistakes we found after the bill was drafted.
Thank you. Anything further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 3.
Amendment number 3. This amendment clarifies that detention center employees on the D1 and D2 pay schedules whose overall performance is rated satisfactory shall receive an increase in pay not to exceed the maximum pay rate for the grade by advancing one step on the pay schedule, in effect, the first full pay period beginning on or after the employee's anniversary date.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick, can we get him first?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman. This is just, again, an error we found that we're correcting for detention center employees.
Thank you. Mr. Pruski?
Yes. This is a question for Ms. Rhodes. The police sergeants, my understanding is this bill may or may not match when their pay raises due, like July and December. Is this bill correct along with their contract? I just want to make sure, because I know this says detention officers, but I didn't see anything for police sergeants.
We'll be coming down with something on the police supervisors. They just made a change to their contract that'll go into effect July 1.
So we'll have another amendment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Oh. Okay. No, I'm sorry. I thought. Anything further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 3.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink. Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 3 is adopted.
Thank you. Is that it? Bill number 5618, as amended, will be heard on July 2nd, 2018. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5718.
Bill number 5718, an ordinance concerning zoning general provisions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I am going to make a motion to hold this bill and ask for a second. There are a number of reasons why it's not quite ready for prime time. I'd like to.
We have to have a public hearing since it's been advertised, since, I mean.
You can hold the vote,
Ah.
yeah, but you must have the public hearing.
That's all right. We'll now open the public hearing on Bill number 5718.
Needs to be.
Seeing the movement, the public hearing on Bill 5718 is now closed.
No, I have not read it into the record. Did I read it? No.
I'm going to ask you to do that.
Okay. Bill number 5718, an ordinance concerning zoning general provisions. Maybe I did? I don't remember.
Yeah, I thought you had read it into the record.
I did.
But it's getting late, so.
Yes.
I apologize. So can I now make that motion?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to move to hold this bill.
Second.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're holding the bill, but I just had a question in regards to the bill itself. Wouldn't the county be able to and maybe this is something you're going to amend, would the county be able to provide opinion regardless? I mean, is this formalizing it? I'm just curious on the intention of the bill.
Yes, Mr. Hager might want to answer that, but my understanding is yes.
We can always provide an opinion, but this bill would require that we do so.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Pruski, for the record, I've served under 3 administrations. They've never been shy about offering opinions, any of them.
So we've had a motion and a second to hold. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll on the motion to hold?
Ms. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink. Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on Bill 5718 is adopted.
Thank you. Is there any further business to be brought before the county council?
Move to adjourn. Oops.
Second.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding by legal counsel, there need to be a clarification on Bill 5118, Amendment 2, so I'd ask to move to reconsider so we don't have to re-advertise it. And if Ms. Tate can explain, well, I guess we need a motion.
I'll rescind my motion to adjourn.
And I'll rescind my second.
Okay.
So again, Amendment number 2, reconsideration 5118.
Madam Parliamentarian.
Yes, Mr. Chair. We asked for a motion to reconsider on the amendment so we can include the deletion of quasi-governmental from the purpose paragraph as well as from the text of the bill. So it's really technical in nature, but since we re-advertised by the purpose paragraph, we want to make sure it's captured by way of the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you. Madam Parliamentarian, just so I'm clear, we're going to vote to reconsider, and then we're going to vote down.
And then we'll, Madam Secretary.
Then we'll read in a new
Administrative
amendment.
Officer has a new amendment,
Okay.
and she'll read that one in.
Okay.
So we have
And
3
then we'll
things
vote
we're
for that.
But first vote yes, then vote no, and then we'll take the other amendment.
Right, and
Gotcha.
do we have someone that seconded the motion on the reconsideration? Okay, thank you. So now it's properly before the body.
Okay, so now we're voting on the motion to reconsider.
Thank
Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll on the motion to reconsider?
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to reconsider amendment number 2 on Bill 5118 is passed.
Okay.
So now we call the roll.
So now we're calling the roll on the prior amendment.
Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll on amendment number 2?
Mr. Grasso.
Nay.
Mr. Fink. Mr. Pruski.
Nay.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
Nay.
And Mr. Smith.
Nay.
Mr. Peruka.
Nay.
None in the affirmative, 7 in the negative. Amendment number 2 is defeated.
We're going to consider amendment number 6 now?
Yes.
Need a motion.
Move to adopt amendment number 6.
Second.
We just got to read it
She's
first.
got to read it.
Ray's going to read it first.
I caught that. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 6.
Amendment number 6. This amendment removes quasi-governmental entities as an allowable requester of a transfer of surplus real property.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski.
Just fixing the technical issue.
Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, just if you're looking to save the council money on advertising purposes, you can reject this amendment and vote on the bill, and the bill can pass tonight. You don't have to re-advertise it.
But then we'll
So
never know. what
we would urge you to
quasi-governmental
reject this
is.
amendment as we urged you the first time to reject amendment number 6.
You still don't know what quasi-
Thank you. Any other further discussion?
It will be up to the council to determine what quasi-government entities are.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
But, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker.
But the administration is willing to provide us with a definition at the next meeting, correct?
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
Again, you all can say no, that's not a quasi-government entity.
Right, but you're willing, but Mr. Fetterman said that you would do that, correct? I just want to make sure that you're going to offer it for us.
That offer still stands.
We still offer to reject this
Thank you.
amendment. It's unnecessary.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 6.
Mr. Grasso?
No.
Mr. Fink?
Nay.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Nay.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Amendment number 6 is adopted.
You picked up one.
Bill number-
Mr. Chairman, you changed your vote on that one.
Bill number 5118, as amended, will be heard on July 2nd, 2018.
Correct.
Move to adjourn. Wait.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? County Council is adjourned until July 2nd, 2018.